good to be back. It had been a little bit, 2 weeks as a matter of fact, for a very good reason. July 15th, as you guys know, I was away. Wanted to enjoy a nice leisure day in New York City, of course. I picked a day that was 97 degrees outside, but you know what? I enjoyed it. It was a nice day to be in the city. Muggy as it was, the city is a great place to be during the summertime. And this was during, I believe, I'm not but much of a soccer guy. The city was abuzz because Argentina was playing France, as I recall, or something along those lines in the semifinal. I don't remember who it was exactly, but it was the penultimate stages of the World Cup. So that was a fun time. And of course, as you guys know, working hard on the release of the second book, which hopefully should be due out in the next few days, ideally, which is, of course, the Police Don't Move, the NYPD investigations you should know about. So I've been working diligently at that the last couple of weeks. I can't speak anymore to get that book off and running, get it to you guys for what will be the second book of my young author career. But good to see all of you, missed all of you. And we certainly have a great guest tonight who's an author himself. I had his brother on quite a while ago, Ralph Friedman, and we'll be talking to him tonight. Yes, and to my buddy Andrew Wood, sorry, Mr. Phone Calls. Nice little leisure day with the family today. I did buff a second alarm fire around the corner from me. Shout out to all my friends in the New Haven Fire Department who made several great stops and did a great job, mitigating what could have been a disaster. There were people hanging out the windows when they got there, and yet they were able to make several great saves and prevent what, in most other scenarios in most other cities, probably would have been a fatal fire. So big shout out. Thank you for reminding me of that, Andrew, to my friends in the New Haven Fire Department and what they were able to do in a very, very chaotic situation. An ad to run, of course, and we'll get to that right now. And that is going to be my friends over at Granite State.
Hey there, firefighters and fire buffs. If you're tuning in to the Mike the New Haven podcast, you know the value of reliable gear. At Granite State Fire Helmets, we're proud to introduce the TL2, our premium leather Phoenix fire helmet. The TL2 is all about comfort, durability, and that timeless style you trust. And here's the best part. All in-stock inventory usually ships within 24 hours, so you'll have it in your hands in no time. Plus, our company is proudly owned and operated by firemen, so you know we've got your back and understand exactly what you need out there on the front lines. So don't wait. Gear up with the TL2 today. Granite State Fire Helmets, where tradition meets innovation, and where firemen have you covered.
Have you covered indeed. And of course, if you want to sponsor the program, my messages are always wide open. I'm happy to showcase whatever you got for those of you that may have anything that you want to showcase on this program. All right, my next guest spent more than 2 decades policing New York City during one of its most turbulent eras, and he began with the then separate from the NYPD, New York City Transit Police in 1974. He worked uniform patrol, where everybody starts, anti-crime, undercover robbery investigations, major case investigations, the warrant squad, and eventually the Bronx Homicide Task Force after the merger with the NYPD in 1995, April 2nd of 95, I believe. And along the way, he survived multiple shootings, earned the Transit Police's Combat Cross, and helped capture several serious and violent criminals along the way, along with responding to several of the city's more significant incidents throughout his roles as an officer first, and of course, ultimately a sergeant, finishing out in 1996. An author as well. This is his book right here that he was nice enough to send my way, Beneath the Concrete Jungle, True Stories of a New York City Detective Sergeant. And like I said, I had his brother on quite a while ago. Now he's on too, and that's Mr. Stu Friedman, who joins me now on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Stu, long time coming to do this with you. Welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, and I appreciate you having me. I'm honored to be on your show.
Thank you very much. Honor's all mine. So before I get into anything involving what was a wild and adventurous 22 years of policing, as we'll chronicle in depth tonight, tell me where it all began for you. Where did you and Ralph grow up?
We grew up in the Kingsbridge Road area of the Bronx. It wasn't such a tough area back in those days. Today it happens to be. But had a good upbringing, had diversity of friends, and went to public schools. We didn't get snow days like kids do today. It was a little tougher. But we enjoyed our growing up, and we both were involved in sports, both did well in school. Upon graduation, I graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School, and I went right into the police department 3 years later. I began college, but I had to drop out due to the death of my father, who died when I was 17. I was a bagel maker prior to becoming a police officer, and that was pretty much the 2 jobs I ever held, being a bagel baker, bagel maker, and a police officer.
Not a bad transition, blue collar work the whole way. Yeah, teaches you a lot. Teaches you a lot. And for those of you, and I know a lot of you were excited about this episode as much as I was. If you have any questions, as you know by now, submit them in the chat, and I'll get to them at the appropriate time. Now, you're of the take the test kid generation, as I lovingly refer to it, where a lot of people, especially growing up in blue collar neighborhoods like yours, were saying, "Hey, listen, sanitation, fire, PD, whatever it is, take it. Good benefits, good jobs." You'll be able to get a pension out of it. We'll talk about, of course, some of the fiscal challenges the city was facing a bit later, but for the most part, individuals that suggest that weren't wrong. Now, some guys know what they want to do early on in life. Other guys, they find it as they go. Did you know you wanted to be a cop?
When I was younger, I didn't have that in mind, but my brother came on the job 4 years before me. Several of his friends did as well. Two of my friends went on, and listening to their stories, I decided, this is what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to sit in an office. I knew I didn't want to stand behind a counter selling bagels all the time. And, the excitement of it, like you mentioned, the pension, the health benefits at the time, those were all very good things to have. The promise of, working for the city, you would never get laid off. You'd always have a steady job. That was the promise. And I took that advice and took the test, did well, and got on right away.
More specifically, and you have to keep this in mind for those of you outside the New York City area, 20,000 people, at least back then, I don't know what the numbers are now, took this particular test because, as you guys know by now, 1974, we're more than 20 years away from the merger. There's 3 different police departments in New York City that you can join. You can either go to the housing police, which had control of all the projects in the city. You can go to the transit police, which had all the subways. And of course, you can also have the New York City Police Department. So there was no telling which way you were going to go. And even now, like you see it with an agency like the FDNY, a lot of people take the test. It's a great job to have. So much so that scoring 619th out of more than 20,000 people is the equivalent, I think, of scoring first or second on a list of 100 people. That was a really good score you got. And as you said, it helped you get on the job right away.
Well, one of the downsides of it, I wouldn't say downside because I had a very good career, but
Right.
I was called to go into the academy. I had an investigator from the 4-7 precinct. I was going into the next NYPD class, and there was a tri-agency test. So they just picked me. I was going, and then the Friday before I was to go into the academy, I got a call. They said that since transit had footed the bill for the test, they were going to have the option of the first 2,000 names. So I would have to go to transit police, which at the time I didn't know too much about. And none of my friends had gone to that agency, or my brother's friends or my brother. But they told me if I didn't get onto the job now, I might have to wait 4 years, or the list might expire. I might never get onto a police job. So, of course, I took the first job that was offered, which was the transit police. And as it turned out, it worked out very well for me because I did have a good career.
It was a very good career. February 11th of 74 is when you got on. And, the academy is the academy. You learn lessons that stick with you for the rest of your career, for certain, when you're going through training like that. But the real education is the streets, or in this case, underground. It wasn't an easy job. The radios were not good back then, even with the repeaters. Sometimes you were on your own. If God forbid you were in a sticky situation, it was kind of hard to get help off the rip. And your district right away was West Harlem, Transit District 3. So, you talked about Kingsbridge not being as hard of an area back then when you were growing up. Now, again, I don't know what it's like today. You would know better than I. Back then, though, 74, 75, how rough or not rough was West Harlem, Transit District 3?
It was pretty rough.
Okay.
There was a lot of drugs. Heroin was the major drug in those years. And we were even, like, for an example, 116th and 8th Avenue, which was one of the areas that we covered. They told us don't cross over to the other side through the street because the station was set up where it's southbound and northbound. There was no crossover underground. So they said you should either go to the 125th Street station or go south to another station to switch over because it was so dangerous to go upstairs. But of course, being young and foolish and thinking I could take the whole world on, I went upstairs, and it didn't happen to me, but some officers were actually shot at as they come out of the subway to cross the street to the other side. And there was all hypodermic needles in the stairwells. There was, junkies all over the street. There were drug dealers all over the street. There was lines of actually to purchase drugs.
Yeah.
It was a rough time. It's hard for people to envision. But there was also a lot of burnt out buildings, a lot of empty yards just full of bricks. It was a tough time for the city. In fact, the city was nicknamed Fear City
Mhm.
by the PBA, if you recall.
Yeah, that was the era. I call it the taxi driver era of New York City because that's essentially,
Right.
yeah, that movie with De Niro in 75, 76 wasn't that far off
That
from
was a
what New
good
York City
depiction of
was.
it.
Yeah, it's a very good, relatively accurate depiction of it. Shout out to all our friends in the chat thus far tuning in tonight. John Costello is always here, and I appreciate that. Raquel Pranzo, Peter Pranzo, former guest of the show as well, and an author in his own right. Here, Steve Iarato, Christian Williams, my friend Andrew Wood, the New Haven fireman. I don't know if he's working tonight, I don't believe so, but on the job in New Haven. Detective Magic's here. Steve Iarato, I mentioned. Ed Murray's here. Rick Martinez, former guest of this show, legend of the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. And speaking of legends, another legend of the NYPD Emergency Service Unit, Steve Stefanakis, who's still going strong, serving in 10 Truck in Queens currently. And Steve, who we jokingly refer to as Pee-wee, he says, bagel maker, did he make them the right way and boil them first?
Absolutely. And they were hand rolled, no machines.
Oh, boy. Yeah, even better. Even better. Talking with Stu Friedman here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Now, again, morale was tough back then because, like you said, it was Fear City. And the subway was a really good microcosm of that because you go down and you could find the pictures on Google. Graffiti all over the trains, the homeless problem on the trains. I mean, you think it's bad today. It was even worse back then when you were starting out. You mentioned the drugs and a lot of the issues above ground or making their way below ground. And, even guys sitting on the train, just chilling, windows open, somebody sneaks by, grabs their chain. It was a relatively, I don't want to go as far as to say lawless place, but it was a jungle down there. And that's a rough position for any cop, young or experienced to get thrown into. But hey, you learned very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And I had some good senior officers that gave me a lot of hints on how to patrol. And you do learn fast. You learn a job a lot quicker in a West Harlem precinct than you would at the time in a quiet Queens precinct because you're getting the education every day of what could go wrong. And you see a lot of things that, they wouldn't see out in the good precincts. Kind of the whole city is rough now. But back then, District 3 covered the 2-8 precinct, the 3-0 precinct, the 3-2 precinct, 3-4 precinct. Those were all tough areas, what we called A houses at the time. I don't think the precincts get those designations now, but those were all A houses, which were active and busy houses, high crime areas.
And it's tough, yes, but at the same time, like you said, you really refine your skills in a way that's going to make you tough and allow you to help not only yourself, but those around you. And talk about on-the-job training. Again, Academy can teach you a lot. I don't think it could prepare you for this, as you were telling me off the air, and I'll hear the story in depth now. 6 weeks, again, 6 weeks out of the Academy, on-the-job shooting.
Well, one thing I want to mention also, back then in those days, we didn't have training officers. You graduated the Academy, you went right out on patrol.
On your own?
On your own. First night, I was given a battery. I was sent to 155th Street, River Avenue, which was the Polo Ground Projects. And they told me, find the officer there and get his radio. Yeah, we had no training officers. So an incident that you mentioned, I was on 110th Street and 8th Avenue, and it was about 1:30 in the morning. It was a very hot, humid night. Normally, I would wear a bulletproof vest, which you had to purchase on your own. We didn't have those issued back in those days either. And it was just so hot that I knew I wouldn't be able to wear that bulletproof vest throughout the night. I left it in my locker. Another thing, I always carried a second gun in my waistband. Back then, we had 6-shot revolvers, no automatics like they carry today. And I even left that in my locker because I was sweating so profusely getting dressed because we didn't have air conditioning in the districts either.
Jesus.
So we didn't have air conditioning. That would be unheard of at the time. And I didn't want my gun to get rust marks on it because of my sweat. So I left my backup gun, I left my vest, and I just said, I'm just going to have an easy night, quiet, 110th Street, 8th Avenue, 1:30 in the morning. I heard 2 people coming down the stairs. They appeared to be friendly because they were together. And one of them was talking to the other, and all of a sudden one jumped over the turnstile to where I was. And I thought right away, this might be a setup of some kind, because back then the Black Liberation Army was executing police officers.
Right.
And that was something we were told and trained about in the academy. I didn't want to put myself between the two of them. But the one that jumped over the turnstile said to me, listen, he just shot at me, and he showed me a bullet hole in his shirt. he was wearing a button-down shirt, and he put his finger through a hole that was made from a bullet. And he said, that guy has a gun. So I looked at the guy, and again, I'm a little inexperienced. I'm only 6 weeks out of the academy. Without drawing my own gun, I told him, take your hands out of your pocket. And when he did, he had a .38 revolver in his hand. And he pointed it at me, and my reaction was to draw my revolver, which I did. I drew my gun out, and he fired 2 rounds. I saw the flashes, because you don't hear it right away. You see the flashes first. But I felt the bullet whiz past my head. And I just, drew my gun. I opened fire at him. I fired 2 rounds. He began to flee up towards the staircase, and I went through the exit gate to pursue him. I fired 2 more rounds at him, and he fired 2 more rounds at me. He made his way up the stairs, and then when he got to the top of the stairs, I fired my last 2 rounds. And we were trained to fire 2 at a time so that you would keep track of the rounds. So I knew that I had fired 6 rounds and had to reload. And I saw him buckle when he was on the top of the stairs. In my mind, I thought he was turning around to come after me, because he might have counted my shots as well. But what happened was he went out of the station, and I had jumped down 14 stairs, which I could never do if I tried it, but the adrenaline is kicked in. I was able to land on my feet, roll over, reload quickly, call for assistance. But the token booth clerk who was sitting there in those old wooden boots with the metal bars across the window, he had called his command center, who called for assistance. And I heard sirens coming. I ran up the stairs, and I found the person up in the street about 10 feet from the station, shot. I had hit him twice. I wasn't hit at all, fortunately. But my training kicked in when the incident occurred. I took my left hand, I covered my chest, I bladed my body, and I counted the rounds like I was taught. The training that they gave you in the academy, you thought you might never use, but it kicked right in like second nature. I searched him, of course, I handcuffed him, but I couldn't find the gun. But a witness came forward and said a girl had just picked up the gun and ran down the street.
Wow.
I was very fortunate, and when you hear those sirens coming in an incident like that, you're very happy.
Right.
And we went to the 2A precinct, and unlike today, I was talked to by a captain later on in the morning. He heard my story. He told me, good job. You have a rush hour condition, and I was back on patrol by 7 o'clock in the morning. And it would never be like that today.
No.
Desk for many months. It was just different back then.
Right.
And in fact, the guy that I did get into the shooting with, or the reason for the shooting, was the person that had jumped over the turnstile to get my attention. He was a drug dealer. He took drugs on consignment, and he never paid for them. And this guy with the gun came from New Jersey to execute him for failure to pay. And he told the guy, listen, I got money. I have it hidden in the subway. I'll pay you there. And the reason he told him that, because the program with transit was to have a police officer on every station and every subway car, well, not subway car, every subway train, between 8 at night and 4 in the morning. It was a policy set up by Mayor Beam, who was the mayor at the time. And that's why he went into the subway, and that's where he found me, standing on the station.
And again, clever, right? Because, had he not done that, he'd be dead.
Well, it only saved his life for a little time, because 2 weeks after the incident, he was found murdered by complaining.
Borrowed time.
Borrowed time. Yeah, he messed with the wrong crew there.
Right.
But and the person that I shot, he was wanted for some homicides. He was wanted for sticking up supermarkets in New Jersey, and he was extradited to New Jersey and never did any time in New York. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in Jersey, and that was the last I heard of it. I did a bedside arraignment at what was Sydenham Hospital at the time. That hospital is no longer there, but that was the last time I saw him.
Back then, when you actually went to jail for these things and stayed there, gee, what a concept. Man. Shout out to Gene Jaworski, by the way, who I'm trying to get on the show, former sergeant in the NYPD Emergency Service Unit. I see him in the chat. He says, hey to you. And Ed Murray says, Stu Friedman was a mentor to many. So he adds that in there as well. And, I will say back then, now one of the good things and one of the good advances in emergency services, period, is there's a debrief. It gives the officer, gives the firefighter, whatever situation, whatever aspect of emergency service the person's involved in, a chance to just thoroughly not only discuss the incident, but get the necessary resources for the mental impact. Like you said, it was a lot different back then. It's not that anybody's wrong. It's just how the era was. Do you feel that just going right back to patrol, though, and staying busy was a way to help you cope with something that was pretty scary?
It's funny that you say that. I never gave it thought because that I knew was how the job was, and that's how it worked. I didn't feel I needed to speak to anybody. I had outlets with my brother and friends that were on the job. My brother had been in some incidents similar to that prior, so he was easy to speak to. Also, asking for help in those days was kind of taboo. You were looked upon as weak. You were looked upon as unfit for the duty. But no, I never had any feelings about it in a negative way because I felt it was myself or him. And I came out ahead, so I was glad about that.
Right. And this was, the year before you got on, for context. Sid Thompson got killed in a similar situation. Fairbeater tried to confront him, got killed for it in June of '73.
The Bronx district.
Right, exactly. So it's a situation where it can go bad in a heartbeat. Look at poor Seraphin Calabrese, same thing. And I think it was for less than $1. I think this, I don't even know if the fare was that much, and the poor guy got killed for it. So like I said, it could go bad in a heartbeat, and better that again that, and as you said, him than you, because if not, then the only way I would know you is if your face was on the Officer Down memorial page. So I'm glad that the right guy won the gun battle that night.
Yeah, thank you.
Exactly. So, I will say, before we get, just for context, before we get into anti-crime, because you do your bit on patrol and you go there, was that before the fiscal crisis of '75 that you got appointed to anti-crime, or after?
What happened was I got the sign there on a temporary basis. I was a very active cop. I happened to make a lot of robbery arrests, which involved weapons and guns. And, I did very well the first 3 to 6 months on the job. I actually led my command in arrests for the year, even having come in out of the academy halfway through the year. So when anti-crime had an officer that went to court or was on vacation, the captain decided he would put me into the anti-crime unit as a temporary fixture. And I worked well with a couple of the guys, and they all liked me. But I still was assigned to the patrol unit, and I would go on patrol if need be, uniform patrol. And I was set to go to be the next officer assigned to anti-crime, but then the fiscal crisis came, and I wound up being laid off. So it was prior to the fiscal crisis that I started there, but it was only on a temporary basis.
So this was 18 months of your life. A lot of guys, a lot of city workers got affected. It's a year and a half, which may seem minuscule to some, but for a guy like you that's a hard worker and you got to fall back on something, that's an eternity.
Well, it changes your whole feeling of the job. I was awarded the Combat Cross, and then about 14 or 15 days later, I'm laid off.
Wow.
The mayor congratulated me on the steps of City Hall, took pictures, and then next thing I know, I'm waiting on an unemployment line with several hundred other cops.
Right. And again, it's A-Beam. It's unfortunate because from all accounts, he was an honest guy, but he was unfortunately the mayor during the worst, or at least one of the worst periods in the city's history. Yeah.
What also happened with the layoffs, which was a bad taste on a lot of cops, was that we told if we gave up 2 vacation days, all the cops throughout the whole job, then they wouldn't have the layoffs because that was money they would be saving. But then they took those 2 days and they laid everybody off anyway.
Right. And again, it's well, Stu, I got some good news and bad news. The good news is here's the transit police Combat Cross. The bad news is you're out of the job, pal. And it sounds funny, but it's pretty much how it went for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
So, I'll ask you, 18 months, some guys drove buses in that time frame. What did you do?
I drove a cab for 2 guys that actually got laid off. They opened up a cab company not too far from my house. So I drove a cab for them for a while. And then I was offered the bus driver position, but that would have made me drive to Brooklyn every day, and I was living in the Bronx. I turned that down, and I became a railroad clerk, selling the tokens in the token booth. And my partner or a guy I had gone through the academy with, he would later on be my partner, Tom McGurl. He actually took the same job, and we decided we would relieve each other at the same booth, which was Burnside Avenue in the Bronx, which was a tough area. It was in the 4-4 precinct. But, we worked well together doing that, and we did that for several months before we were rehired.
I mean, at least you had something to fall back on. And again, as you said, it changed your perspective on things. Now comes a period of time where the city's kind of crawling back to recovery. As I told you off the air, this is the forward to city drop dead era, where you saw that headline in the newspapers, and it was true because the city could not get a break financially. But a lot of guys who had gotten a raw deal like yourself were able to come back. I mean, it makes you a little weary. Some guys are understandably bitter because they should have never had to lose their jobs to begin with. Were there mixed emotions? Because on one hand, you're happy to be back doing what you really want to do with your life. But on the other hand, it's like, Jesus, boy, I got a raw deal.
Well, it happens to everybody. It wasn't just me.
Mm-hmm.
So I never held it against the city or the department. I was just in that wrong group of people, came on at the wrong time. But I was actually very happy to get the job back. And in my mind, I was going to continue where I left off. And fortunately for myself, they brought us back to the academy for a 2-week orientation. And I was with my friend who I had gone through the academy with, Tom McGurl. And the captain of District 3, which was where I had left, he was a captain I hadn't known. He came to the awards ceremony, which was being held at the academy. And we were there at that time. So Tommy and I were chosen to be ushers because both of us had, department recognition at that time, and we had medals over our shields. So they said, we want you guys to be ushers. And this Captain Latimer, George Latimer, who would later on be deputy chief of the department, he came and he introduced himself and said, listen, I actually came here, I wanted to see you. I heard that you worked in District 3. I'd like you to come back and work for me, and I'll put you in anti-crime right away. And I said, well, this is my partner, Tom. Can I bring him? He goes, yeah, absolutely. So he did. He kept his promise. We went to District 3, and Tommy and I became partners in anti-crime. And I would end up working with Tommy many years in anti-crime, in the robbery task force, and actually we were promoted together as detectives and worked in the major case squad together as detectives.
So it had a nice ending overall, and you guys were able to pick up where you left off, like you said.
Yeah, we continue. We were very active cops. At one time when we were in citywide anti-crime, the entire department, crisis management, they put everybody, including the detective bureau, back into uniform. So they disbanded the citywide anti-crime. We all went back to our old commands. And everybody had to work in uniform. And actually, that was the first time everybody had beards in uniform, because all the anti-crime guys came back, and they didn't make us shave right away because they knew how disappointed everybody was from being in a career path plain clothes unit to now being back on patrol in uniform. They wanted to put us on trains, and it was just crisis management. Every time the statistics went up, they didn't know what to do, so they just said, flood the subway with uniformed police. And in fact, there was a lot of overtime. NYPD cops were in the subways. It was just everybody was in the subway. Kind of like what's going on now, how they wanted to bring in cops from the MTA, NYPD, everybody flood the subway with police.
Hell, you got the National Guard down there, too, for that.
Yeah. Anybody to think of fine.
You're not too far off with that. And, again, TPF was still a thing back then, though. At this time, we still had TPF.
Well, TPF was the 8 at night till 4 o'clock in the morning program where they had to ride trains from one end of the city to the other. I was never involved in that because, fortunately, my seniority was so high in the academy that I was able to choose midnights. And that's where I went. I went instead of midnights. But most of the academy class went to that TPF because it was such an undesirable tour and assignment that every time an academy class came out, they would be replaced by they would replace the people that were there already.
It was a struggle back then. It was a struggle, which is why I commend anybody that was working for the city during that time that got through it. Because, man, you talk about building character. You're battling so many different things, especially as a cop. You're battling the natural elements that a cop has to face, in addition to, of course, a city that's crumbling and you can't control it. It's above your pay grade. But it affected you for a period of time because you were essentially robbed of being in a great unit like anti-crime, where we see it's launched a lot of guys' careers. And you talk about the skills you learn on patrol. It's a whole different set of invaluable skills that you learn from working plainclothes.
Well, you mentioned, fighting the system. I'll tell you another thing that I had to fight when I was a young cop was that because they had the program 8 at night till 4 in the morning, cop on every train, every platform, every station, the mayor said there'll be no crime between 8 at night and 4 in the morning. So I was working midnights. I'd make an arrest at 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock, and you had to call a centralized number down at operations to report that you made an arrest. And they would tell me, well, call back after 4 o'clock, because they didn't want to have the recorded crime between 8 at night and 4 in the morning. So my paperwork never matched what they had down at operations. They would say, put down whatever time you want. We're putting down notified 4:05. So this way the crime was, as the mayor had asked, 8 at night, 4 in the morning, no crime. But in reality, the crime was going on all night.
Right. Again, because even guys doing stuff in the subway as it is, yes. But also a guy just did something above ground. Like we said earlier, now he's coming down below ground. He's quite literally in transit trying to get away from what he just did. And now he's your problem too.
Right. And then one thing the job didn't recognize, they do now, but they never did, was that those guys that are committing robberies and crimes up in the street, they commit the same crimes in the subway system as well. But the subway was always a business for the city, and they didn't want to have crime in the subway. So they didn't want to involve you in many things off the subway or carry it as a crime statistic. It's like if you have a restaurant and people come in and they hear it's robbed every Friday, they're not going to come in on Friday nights, right?
Exactly. Listen, the message gets out there. All of a sudden, a loss of passengers on the train is a loss of revenue. And I remember talking about it. Joe said. Joe said was on this program a while ago.
Great guy.
Man, great guy. And he was on a while ago for my ESU miniseries. Joe talked about it. When EMRU was formed, one of the reasons that they formed it was, besides the good PR, to keep the train going. That way, if somebody got sick or was giving birth or something like that on the train, if you had to stop the train, they're losing money. So you have to get them off the train quick, as quickly as you could. So it's sad to say, but listen, you guys in the audience, a lot of you are on the job. Unfortunately, it's a money game.
Yep.
It's a big time money game.
Absolutely.
It doesn't diminish the great work that's done. And that brings us to 79, where the Transit Robbery Task Force is formed at this time. Again, it's a big problem in the subways, like we talked about earlier. Poor guys just sitting, leaning up against the cars. The window's open. Here comes scumbag number one. He reaches in, grabs a chain, grabs his wallet, grabs anything. Girls are wearing the earrings and whatnot, snatches the earrings right out of her ears. It was a big problem back then. You and the late, great Jack Maple were one of 17 people selected for this unit. So again, you were an active guy. It's no surprise. But tell us about how cool that assignment was.
It was a great assignment. You had your partner, and you can go on duty anywhere in the city as long as your partner was going on duty with you at the time. And we were part of the detective bureau. There were 17 of us, 6 detectives. The detectives were used to follow up and enhance on the cases that we were building. Another thing that was a common thing, if you had 4 guys involved in a robbery and that one was apprehended, that was considered a closed case. What happened when we formed the robbery task force was that if you have a cop or yourself or whoever apprehended one, we were going to go out and get the other 3. That case wasn't closed till everybody involved was under arrest. And that was the whole idea of the robbery task force, to get everybody involved in these crimes. And a lot of them were what they called wolf pack crimes. I don't know if that's a word you've heard before.
Yeah.
But, groups of 6, group of 8, they would do robberies, and they wanted us to find everybody in those groups. And what we did was infiltrate. Spent a lot of time in the Times Square area, which at the time was all porno theaters, a lot of drugs, a lot of prostitution. And we would hang out in the street. I was 27 years old. I was actually younger. And full of tattoos. I had long hair, a beard. Blend in with the crowd, blend in with these groups, blend in with the gangs, talk to them. They had no idea that I was a police officer at the time. And they would confess to things that they did. Oh, we just ripped off somebody. Tom, my partner, would call the precinct. He'd get the information, find out if this was the group. They fit the description. We'd call up, have radio cars come around, circle, and grab all of them, get the complainant, and we get good IDs. So that's what we did in that robbery task force. And you mentioned Jack Maple. Jack was very active. And what he would do is he would climb up on top of the newsstands that were located at different ends of Times Square and 22nd and 8th Avenue. And he had binoculars, and he would watch people all through the street. And he'd say, criminals look left and right, but they never look up. That's what he used to say.
Right.
And he had a lot of stores that would sell holsters, gravity knives, which is illegal to carry, daggers, illegal. And he would watch and see them come into the store, and he'd see the store owner take a holster off the window display, and he'd say, oh, somebody's buying a gun, a holster for a gun. And he would see who went in, see who came out. If they can't help themselves, they open up the bag, they have to look at the holster. Jack and his partner would follow the guys many times into the subway, where they would go into a little dark area and put the holster on and then put the gun in the holster. And Jack would lock those guys up. He would get them for the gun. Him and his partner followed two guys that went to a car. The car had Virginia plates. Turned out they were wanted for sticking up a diner in Virginia. Had a stolen car. They shot one of the patrons. So he did a lot of great things, Jack. And our unit worked well with the NYPD. We worked together hand in hand with the anti-crime units, with the detectives there. We worked because we wanted to get the same people committing all the same robberies, different places, but on both of our jurisdictions. So it was a very good unit, and that's where I got promoted out of 3 years later.
And again, a lot of credit goes as well to the late Chief Mario Selvaggi. A lot of people forget about him with what I'm about to mention. But besides him, a lot of what originated with CompStat, which has not only come to define New York City policing, but policing on a nationwide, even dare I say worldwide scale, because different variations of it have been used, started with Jack in part on a map and pins, where he pinpointed the areas where it was happening the most.
Yeah, he had a scale of a map, and he would put pins, different colors for robberies, grand larcenies, and if you catch somebody, he would say, "Oh, you got a pinhead," meaning we caught somebody that committed this robbery because they fit the pinhead on the wall. Yeah.
There we go, and it worked. I mean, again, it worked. We had quite the character who we lost. His anniversary is actually coming up in a few days. He died August 4th of 2001 of cancer at the age of 49. And there's a great television show called The District based off of his CompStat model. And another thing, I remember him saying this, it's a quote that lives on, because even towards the end of his life, he never lost a sense of humor from what I've read, where he said he wanted his funeral to go down, I believe it might have been, somebody could pull up the exact quote, 4th or 5th Avenue in the middle of the day, because the exact quote was, "For once, they'll stop for the fat traffic cop." And I believe that's where his funeral was held.
It was. He was a funny guy. I don't think he got the credit that he deserved from a lot of cops, because especially after the merge, when he became the commissioner of strategies, they thought that, oh, this guy just had connections, but he really was very innovative. And he's the one who came up with, these precinct captains and these people. They never know what the figures are. They never know how many robberies. And that's where CompStat started, to call down these bosses and say, what's going on in your precinct? What's going on in your district? What's going on in your public, housing? What's going on in these places? And if the captain didn't know, then he better find a new place to work. He held them accountable for their positions.
And not just him. Think about it. When you walked in there, and this is, 94, 95, 96, and even for a little bit afterwards, because some guys didn't retire right away when Bill left, meaning Bratton. You had Bill Bratton grilling you. If it wasn't Bill Bratton there, it was, as you said, Jack Maple, and a little guy named Lou Animone.
Lou Animone
did not play games.
No, and he was a great cop himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was decorated. He did a lot of police work. He knew where he was coming from.
Uh-huh.
Very well respected.
Yep, Lou's a friend, a legend in his own right. Lou's been on this program quite a number of times, and so I haven't seen my friend Lou in a bit. So shout out to him. Hope he's doing well. But yes, another very excellent cop in his own right. And again, this was really one of the better units of the city, because we've stressed enough on this program to this point, and we'll continue to, the importance of those skills. It's not just the patrol skills. It's not just the ability to make collars, which you were doing. It's the investigative skills. And I think those are the guys, and we'll talk about it, of course, as it pertains to you making sergeant later on. Those are the guys that make the best bosses, the guys that have been there. They have those skills. They work those investigations. They understand what their cops are thinking when they hit the street.
Sure. No, I'm glad. being a detective for 3 years definitely helped me in being a supervisor. I was a supervisor for 13 years on the job, and many of them as a supervisor and detectives. And it definitely made a difference in my career as far as, like you mentioned, the learning and being aware of investigations and what to expect from these guys and what they're thinking, and to help them in their cases, or get their ideas and work together with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a 3-year stretch, 81, I would say, to 84 when you made sergeant and went citywide, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Major case as a third grader, which again is nothing to sneeze at. A lot was going on in the city back then. Tell me about, and we'll get to one in particular that was very tragic involving one of your own in 84. But before that, tell me about some of the other major cases you worked.
Well, when I first got there, the New York State Abuse Foundation, I forget exactly what the title was, they had identified some places that there were drugs being sold in the subway. That city narcotics wouldn't go down because it was hard for them to keep their undercover under surveillance. Normally, they have a backup team, and they have, I forget the word, but they have their undercovers always under surveillance. And they weren't able to do that. So those stations, 14 of them that were pinpointed, were left really unenforced from narcotics. So they took me to do narcotics investigations with 2 other detectives. And we got some brief training in undercover work. And I was going to be the undercover because of my long hair and tattoos. And I started to make buys every day at these different locations, which happened to be in close proximity of methadone centers. People were selling their methadone. They were selling uppers at the time. They were selling pills, and I was making these purchases. Some marijuana sales, but not too often. And what happened was, this was supposed to be a 6-week operation, but on the 4th week, I had made so many buys, and my backup had made so many collars. Every collar is a crime statistic for wherever you make that arrest. So now the crime statistics were going up in the subway. So they pulled us off and said, listen, we just wanted you to make an arrest a day or something. You're making 10 arrests a day. This is way out of line. So they wound up cutting the whole thing, and they were able to report back to the state abuse center that, all right, this was all addressed, and now we've hit the place. But that's what I did for the first 4 to 6 weeks, undercover buys of narcotics. But then I did a lot of investigations requiring deaths on the subway. Of course, they all have to be investigated. And a lot of them are very sad. A lot of them are people struck by trains. Of course, you have to investigate if they're accidental, if they were pushed. 99% of them are accidental. The trains, when they're moving, people get between the cars to maybe urinate. They don't understand the dangers of that because the car's bouncing around. They'd fall between the cars. I've seen it happen to children where the parents are just walking through. They don't hold on to the child. Those are very sad cases. And another sad thing that you have to do in the major case squad or any detective, you have to make the notifications of the death to the family. And, at 3 o'clock in the morning, when 2 guys in suits knock on your door with gold shields on their suit pockets, it's not good news.
Right.
Because if it was an arrest, they would be calling you from the precinct. So it's a very tough thing to get used to doing, but it's a necessity of the job. You have to do it. And of course, we worked many sexual crimes that occurred in the subway. Again, rape cases, felony assaults, gunshots, stabbings. They were all occurring back in those years. And those were some of the cases that we'd have to investigate, likely to die cases with people stabbed. Most of the districts handled the lower end robberies, gun robberies. They had a booth robbery squad, but at night we would handle the booth robbery squads because they were closed. So any booth robberies. We had one in particular case where 4 guys stuck up a token booth on 110th Street and 8th Avenue, the station that I had my first shooting at. And they did it at the end that bordered with Central Park West. And they went down and they took 7 people hostage, which were the cleaning crew that were cleaning the station that night. And they took the clerk that was in the token booth, and they robbed the booth of all the tokens and all the cash. Back then, there was no Metro cards, so everything was cash. And what happened was they ran upstairs. 3 of them went down. 3 of them came up to get into the waiting getaway car, and a radio car from the 2-8 was just happened to be sitting at the red light. And they panicked. They saw the radio car sitting at the light. They thought somebody had called the police. So they dropped a lot of the proceeds of the tokens and jumped over the wall to Central Park. Then the cops noticed, because it was very quiet. It was like 3 in the morning. They saw one guy jump into the car, and the car took off. So they chased the car, put it over the air. And, of course, emergency service, several precincts, transit, everybody responded to the location in Central Park to search for the other perpetrators that fled over the wall. I was a sergeant in the major case squad at that point, but we responded there, and we did our investigation. About 6 o'clock in the morning, we were heading back to the command. I was with Detective Henry Noasat, and I saw 2 guys walking along Central Park. They sort of fit the description. They weren't wearing the same shirts and things. But when we passed them, I noticed they both had mud on their shoes. So I said, well, no one's going to work at this hour with mud on their shoes. So we drove around the block, and they would cross the street. We were able to pull over, and we recovered a firearm in the pocket, and they had identified them as the 2 that was involved in that robbery. So, those were other things that we did in education.
Patterns. I mean, it sounds simple enough. It's something we learn as little children in school. But again, it applies to adult life too. Patterns. If you recognize these guys from prior acts, even if they're doing it for the first time, it's helpful along the way to kind of put 2 and 2 together. It goes a long way. Even something as simple as recognizing, that guy had a scar on his left cheek. Yeah, it's the same guy. Goes a long way. And that was plenty of what you guys did.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We worked a lot on descriptions. We worked a lot on patterns. Patterns was a big thing. We had a particular sergeant that was very good at that. He would say, listen, I think they're going to hit this subway station on a robbery sometime tonight because they've been doing it every other Thursday. And, sure enough, we would do a stakeout, and there it was. There they are.
Right. Then boom, you're able to make a lot of great collars that way. I mean, and even something as simple as assaults on the train. I mean, I remember seeing a sneak peek of it in the episode the cops did with the transit police back in late 1993, early 1994. You got kids from opposing high schools. They're beefing over something. They get into fights. Somebody gets beat up pretty good, if not stabbed or shot. You're on those cases too. So a lot across the 4 boroughs, because if I remember correctly, you guys had every borough but Staten Island.
Right. That's correct.
I mean, listen, imagine if you had that too on top of it. It's already here. It's going to go here. But listen, it was a lot of rewarding work, but it's tough when it's one of your own. Transit police had a line of duty death in 1983. Joe Hamperian, who was a plainclothes guy, unfortunately, not an intentional act. He was struck by a vehicle.
Yep.
And unfortunately killed. That wasn't intentional, although still very sad. As far as somebody killed in the commission of a felonious act, that hadn't happened since Joe Keegan had gotten killed in 80. And then we get something that really not only shook the transit police, but shook the city to its core. I mean, anytime a cop is murdered in the line of duty, anytime any public servant, cop, firefighter dies in the line of duty, it rattles the city. But to this day, I don't think there's anything more heartbreaking, or few things more heartbreaking than what happened to Irma Lozada, also known as Fran. A young cop, beautiful young girl, and, liked to get after it. Went out there. She didn't hide. She went out there, embraced her job. She was a go-getter by all accounts. And September 21st, 1984, which I believe was a Friday in the city, her and her partner split up to go after a guy that I think had committed some sort of a theft. They watched him do it. And I'm not even going to say the scumbag's name. We know what his name is. We're not going to say his name on this program. He doesn't deserve it. And, unfortunately, she finds him. A struggle ensues. He overpowers her. And something that is about as animalistic as it gets, despite the fact that she begged for his life, this animal killed her, shot her point blank in the face, and she was found, I think, a few hours later. I mean, even saying it now, almost 42 years later, I'm getting goosebumps telling it, and I didn't live it. You did. This was something that makes the blood boil for anybody. Tell me about that.
Well, I was a detective at the time. I got into work, and they said, listen, we have one of our own was shot and killed. You got to go out there. And I got there after the fact, many hours after the fact. But it was a very sad case for me because I knew Irma personally. She, like you mentioned, she was a very active cop. She worked in plain clothes. She made her way into anti-crime unit. She earned her way there. And she actually got hurt and was assigned to headquarters where my office and this major case squad was located, and she was assigned to the criminal intelligence section while she was in the healing process on limited duty. And that's how I got to know her. And we were in our cases, and she would, do license checks for us, plate checks for us, run names for us. And she was a great person, great cop. She couldn't wait to go back to work. And then she did. She went back to full duty, went back to her anti-crime unit. Her and a partner witnessed this chain snatch on the train, and they took pursuit. This was in East New York, Brooklyn, tough area. They knew that from their experience in that area, that usually a perpetrator would run down a particular street and cross some subway tracks to get across to another street. So they split up. One took pursuit from behind, and one went around to the other side to catch him. But somehow he was very quick. He got away. Irma was the one who kept in pursuit of him, never lost sight of him. And he went into this area. He was running out of breath at this time. He was many blocks away. And they got wound up in the backyard of a building, which had all debris thrown there, tires, refrigerators, all kinds of things, and high weeds, which made it hard for people to see.
Right.
And Irma was smart. We learned from a witness later on that she was calling out as if she had lost her dog. She didn't want to alert the guy that she was coming after him because he had slowed down to catch his breath. And when she got close enough to him, she identified herself, drew her weapon, had her shield in her hand, and went to take him into custody. He turned around. He was able to overpower her, get her firearm, and he shot her. The shot hit her in the face and knocked her to the ground. She did beg first, not to be shot, but he shot her anyway. And he turned to leave. And according to a witness that we located, he walked a couple of feet and he decided to go back. And that's when he shot her again, and that was the fatal shot. She more than likely would have survived the first shot. So he executed her, and he fled the scene. My part, as far as in the investigation, was to canvass buildings. There was 100 detectives on it from all agencies. You could imagine the turnout at that point, how many police were there. Unfortunately, she wasn't found for many hours later because her partner went back to the command, said, "Where's Irma?" And he said, "Well, we were chasing somebody. We kind of got separated, but she might have went to pick up lunch." And I don't blame anybody for it, because back in those days, it would be like, well, yeah, if they went to lunch, they'll come back in a few minutes. The radio communication was terrible. When they were in the pursuit, they had put it over the air. Central never even got it. And nobody really even knew, because otherwise other units would have responded, back them up. So they waited a few hours, hopefully for her return. And when she never returned, then panic started to set in a bit. And they said, listen, we got to start making notifications. They notified the precincts, notified other commands. Intensive search was conducted, and eventually they found her. In our canvases, we were locating witnesses in the building that some people actually saw the crime committed, but people didn't back in those days, and they didn't want to get involved. They thought it was a pimp. They thought it was a prostitute. They thought it was a drug deal. Nobody called 911. Nobody wanted to call 911 and have a phone traced to them or give their name, so they let it sit. But when they realized it was a police officer, the neighborhood actually did come together and start giving police information. They told everybody what they saw. That's how we knew that she was calling for a dog. And the good part was that the perpetrator was apprehended. But it was a very sad case for me because I knew her personally. The way it went down, it was uncalled for. The guy could have pushed her down, beat her, took her gun, and left. He didn't have to execute her.
I mean, or he could have just complied in the first place and understood, hey, listen, nobody told me to snatch a chain, I did it, but no, why be accountable for your actions when you can do a scumbag
Well,
thing?
of course, that would have been the best.
That would have been the best outcome of all. She was, I think, all of 25 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her, and I just,
And she was the first female officer killed in line of duty in New York City.
Yeah, and another one would not follow until Maura Smith on September 11, 2001. And Captain Kathy Mazza, the Port Authority Police, both of them, Maura was of the NYPD, the 13th precinct, were killed.
Many more have passed from 9/11 related illnesses over the years.
Over the years. But those two died that day. And They would be the second and the third, respectively. But Irma, she left an imprint on everybody's heart that knew her and worked with her and knows of her story. She'd be in her 60s now and probably enjoying retirement, and something that was robbed from her, along with many other things that were taken from her. The most important thing being her life. Unfortunately, for those not familiar, the individual who murdered her was released on parole in December of 2021. So he is out tragically, which is basically killing her again, but that's a different story for a different day.
He was one of 43 police killers that have been released in New York State.
Yeah, just it'll be 42 years in September for her. She's not forgotten. She'll never be forgotten. So I know that was tough to talk about. So I thank you for talking about it, because she deserves it, and she will be. As far as anybody that knows her, or as you did, or knows of her story is concerned. Switching subjects, on a little bit of a lighter note, 85 presents, you weren't there long, but one of the great inventions of the transit police, as I talked about earlier, was EMRU. And created by Joe Sed and Dean Esterman. It was a great unit that, of course, lived from 77 until the merger in 95, when all those guys got merged into ESU. And for a brief period of time, you got to be with those guys. So it was a different side of police work, but I imagine it was fun.
It was fun, and like you said, Joe Sed, great guy.
Mm-hmm.
He did a lot more than I did. I never got under the trains. Joe liked doing that.
Yes, he did.
One of the things I was given the emergency service unit and the canine unit from 10 at night till 6 in the morning, citywide. They gave me a truck, and that was my job. Canine guys, they said, listen, you're not one of us until a dog takes a bite on you. So we had to meet one night, and they put the padded arm on me and had the dog bite. And they said, okay, now you can say you're a canine sergeant, because I didn't have my own dog. I didn't have a dog, but they accepted me. The emergency guys told me, listen, you got to get under a train for us to say you're an emergency guy, but I never made it under the train. But they knew that I backed them on every job. I responded all over the city. The guys I worked with were all great, all gun-ho guys, all dedicated guys, and I enjoyed working with them. And like you said, it was a short stay there, but it was very rewarding, very informative, and I got to see another side of the police work that I never got to see because I was doing other things. And the emergency service guys, they're great guys. They do things that a lot of cops just don't realize what they do until they see them do it or want to do. Let's put it that way. It's a lot of training, a lot of things they do. Very respectful.
Right. They put the special operations, and I say that in the most loving sense possible, because you have to. And Pat Pogan's in the chat. You were a truck 2 guy, Pat, in Harlem, so obviously Steve Stefanakis, I mentioned earlier, he's in the chat too. For an ESU cop's day can literally consist of, in the morning, hey, we got that guy. He's a hitman. He's wanted in connection with 6 homicides. Detective squad's going, can you go kick down the door and get him? It can be that, to where, hey, somebody's hand is stuck in a meat grinder right after that. Can you go get them out the meat grinder? Oh, by the way, there's an overturn on the highway. Can you rescue them? And I think, oh, yeah, we got a man with a gun running down the street. You mind corralling him while you're at it? Sometimes this stuff can happen, tour to tour, back to back. It doesn't stop. And it's a litany of different things that they confront. We have a wild raccoon running around, even something as silly as that, or as silly as it may sound. ESU is the one that goes out there and corrals them. So transit rescue back then. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to mention a thing about ESU. One night when I was working undercover in the Times Square area,
mm-hmm.
I saw a guy adjust a gun in a shoulder holster. So my partner and I were following him down the street. And when it got to a quiet area with less civilians around near a store vestibule, I went to push him into the store vestibule, and I pulled out my gun, told him not to move. And the next thing I heard was the racking of a shotgun. And that's something you don't want to hear from behind you, believe me. And it was an emergency service cop, 2 of them. One had the shotgun. They were leaning over the hood of the truck. They were following us, following the guy. And I pulled out the gun. They didn't think I was a cop, because like I said, long hair, tattoos, beard. And he racked that gun, and the other guy yelled, "Drop the gun, man." And I dropped that gun. So I had my experience with them.
Right. No, listen, those Rugers back then, they carried all the Ithacas that they had back then. I mean, they don't mess around. Still to this day, it's the same thing. I have the utmost respect for those guys. I love those guys. They've been great to me over the years. Just a very special unit. And just a little last note on transit rescue, specifically before I get to 86 and you go into the warrants division, is that their specialty, which is what made them so great when they went into ESU in 1995, is the airbags underneath the trains. That was a major invention that made an unenviable task of removing people who had been struck by the trains out. They would lift the train up. That was a huge thing that nobody else had done before, except for them when they first started in 77, 78, major invention. And, as far as anything specific to train operations, train fires, you name it, that's their specialty right there. Yeah, underground work, they refined it and still lives on even after the merger today. So 86 is an interesting chapter because by this point, you're a dozen years into your career. You're humming along in transit. Listen, transit's not an easy job. A lot of people looked at it as the stepchild. Like they looked at housing too as the stepchild. But you guys made it work and you guys were, going out there and proving, hey, listen, we may not be the NYPD, but we got a lot of great workers in our own right. But then comes an instance where, although still on the transit payroll, you're detached, detailed, if you will, to the NYPD Warrant Division 86. Take it away.
I was a sergeant, and they were looking for a sergeant to go to the NYPD Warrant Division. It was already established that there were 12 officers there and another sergeant. They needed a second sergeant, so I was chosen to go to the NYPD Warrant Division, and I worked out of Central Warrants for a year, which was kind of mandatory. They wanted you to learn the entire Warrant Division system, what each warrant meant, because they're numbered, they're lettered, numbered. And I did very well there. I took the opportunity to enter the warrants, to learn every aspect of it. And while I was there, the captain, Captain McCauley, he said, I like the way you work, and I'm going to start a new unit, and I want you to be the CO of the unit. And it was called the Central Warrant Investigation Team. In fact, you said Eddie Murray was one of the people watching the show right now. He was one of the officers assigned to it, and I got to work with Ed and a bunch of other officers. There was officers from NYPD, there was a few from housing. And I tell you, we all worked well together. We worked citywide. We actually started to lead the Warrant Division in arrests. Eddie himself got involved in a shooting in the Bronx, in which he shot a perpetrator who pulled out a butcher knife on him and his partner at the time, Chris Canuck. They did a great job. This guy was very dangerous, wanted for other crimes, wanted for assaults. So I loved working with Eddie. He eventually went into the Regional Fugitive Task Force with the Marshal Service. Worked with a lot of great guys. And I wound up working in the Bronx Warrant Squad, where I worked for over 3 years. So I did over 5 years in the Warrant Division. I worked in the New York State Police Task Force. We had 25 troopers assigned to Bronx warrants. Again, working with a lot of good guys, and that was really the highlight of my career. I worked in a lot of great units, both as a cop, detective, a sergeant, but I loved going after the fugitives, people that they were wanted for rapes, they were wanted for robberies, they were wanted for drug sales, they were wanted for murder, they were wanted for every single crime. And I loved chasing after those guys. That was a great part of my career.
Now, a quick question, because I know this is where he made his bones, really, before he went on to grander things. And controversial a figure as he was, I really regret not getting him on the program in hindsight. Did you cross paths with Bernie Carrick around this time?
I knew Bernie Carrick because I was a sergeant at the time. We had volunteered our services to drive Mayor Giuliani as part of the New York Shields. I was on the New York Shields executive board. And I met Bernie through there. And, we got along well. And we had not a very close friendship, but we knew each other through the New York Shields. And that's really, I knew he was a detective. I knew he was in narcotics. He did a lot of federal cases, him and Jerry Spitzal. In fact, just an off note, Jerry was with my ex-sister-in-law when there was a shooting in the Bronx on the Grand Concourse, or Sheridan Avenue, where it started. If you recall, it was the largest shooting in NYPD history. There was like 129 shots fired.
Larry Davis?
No, it wasn't Larry Davis.
Oh.
This was where a guy had killed a woman in the hallway. They responded to the robbery. John Flynn was one of the cops in the 4-6 precinct, arrived on the scene. He was shot in the arm. Then my sister-in-law arrived, or my ex-sister-in-law with Jerry, and Jerry was shot in the arm, and my sister-in-law was shot in the bulletproof vest and shield. And she was saved by the vest that she had purchased herself. Actually, her father had bought it for her. And the guy had crossed over roofs and came out, and somebody spotted him. By that time, the newscasters had been there. There was all three agency departments had responded. There was about 100 cops in the street. This guy turned and fired, and everybody opened fire at him. It was actually used as a training film in the academy years later.
I mean, if you have 3 different police departments shooting at you, you've done something to deserve it. Not to be humorous, but think about that. You have all 3 city police departments that you're shooting it out with. At some point, you got to kind of look up and say, I have made terrible choices in life.
I would say so.
Jesus, I would say so. Well, listen, lesson learned in the form of death, and albeit a very deserved one in that instance, just for the sheer stupidity of it. Now, I will say, he ended up going back to transit in 90, but to that point, transit work in different forms was all you knew. And now going to the NYPD in 86, working there through 90, how do you feel that enhanced your career, besides the obvious, from the standpoint too? And what do you feel, especially now by this point being a boss, that was able to help in terms of bringing those lessons back to transit when you went back as a detective supervisor in 90?
We pretty much worked all the same because I had been used to working in task forces with the precinct level anti-crime units. I had worked on joint cases with them. What it did was it opened my eyes to a lot of the dangers that the warrant officers faced, which I wasn't aware of. We would walk into buildings. Our intention is to get somebody on a wanted, a warrant. And what would happen is you walk into guys that are dealing drugs out of the hallway. They think you're there for them. So now you're recovering guns that are being hidden in mailboxes, narcotics that are being hidden in broken mailboxes. We walked into a building one day and the woman said, how'd you get here so fast? Why? She says, I just called. There was a guy who just killed himself in the apartment upstairs. These are things you are walking into because people think that you're the precinct cop or the, narcotics or something else. They know what's going on in their mind. We don't know what's going on in their mind. So I just learned to be more observant, to be ready to prepare for anything, which you should always be prepared for anyway. But I learned about warrant investigations and fugitive investigations and how to track people, how to question the people who wanted subjects. I mean, I've done that before as a detective, but it's just good. I worked with all different precincts, all different agencies, so it enhanced my cooperation with, and I got to know a lot of people. So that always helped in my career because as I moved on, I had connections in a lot of precincts citywide because I had made these connections while working in the warrant division. And fortunately, and not patting myself on the back, but I was a well-respected boss, and I worked well with other people. And that helped me later on in my career because as a supervisor of detectives, I could walk into a precinct in Brooklyn and the guy would go, oh, I remember you. You used to work in the warrant division. And I'd walk into Queens and he'd say, sure, I remember you. You were here when Eddie Burns, unfortunately, was killed. And, people remembered me from these different cases and different being on the scenes of things. So it definitely helped my career.
Right. Because here's the underrated part of it, and this is a part of any job, especially a job like yours. Networking. It goes a long way. You have to do it. If you're a guy that plays nice in the sandbox, especially in your line of work, oh my goodness, does that help?
Of course, and that means a lot during investigations, and even the sales of my books. So many people knew me. They said, "Oh yeah, you should write a book." And I never really advertised, but through my networking, through Facebook and other social media, they all did well and became bestsellers.
Yeah, absolutely. One of which I have in front of me, of course, which is, again, this little ditty right here, Beneath the Concrete Jungle, which I was lucky enough to get recently from you. Thanks again for that one, and we'll talk about that book in a little while. That being said, you didn't see it from the patrol standpoint because you were long removed from patrol by then. But we talked about it earlier. Maple moves up the ladder. Bratton comes in. This is before anybody really knew who Bill was in New York City. It's before he became NYPD commissioner the first time. But where he made his mark in terms of establishing himself in the city was really, really revamping the transit police. Morale was an issue. By the time he left in 1992, morale was through the roof. I mean, even something as simple as changing the vehicle fleet went a long way. We know what he did for the patrol guys. How good was he to the detective bureau?
Well, what he did was when Bratton came, I was in the warrant division. and I had to go and have a meeting with him to give him statistics on how many transit warrants we had, how many transit warrants we were handling, how many were, being closed by arrest. And he was very impressed with the warrant division people. Uh, at the time, the warrant division didn't fall under the detective bureau, but it was a career path for NYPD officers who did 18 months in investigative assignment. They would get the shield, they would get the gold shield, but it didn't apply to the transit police at that time. And he listened to the whole story, and I told him about how it's a career path for the uh, NYPD investigators. They become detectives after 18 months, where our guys have been here for 3 years and have never gotten promoted. And he thought about it, and he said, you know what? Let me think about this. And a week later, he promoted everybody that was detached as far as officers. He promoted them in a ceremony to detective. And then about a month later, he promoted me to supervisor detective squad.
Nice.
So he did build the morale right there. I enjoyed where I was, but once I got promoted, he decided he was going to open up our own warrant squad. And that's what he did. He brought back all the guys. He formed the transit police warrant squad. I went to the major case squad, but Jack Maple actually was going to run the warrant division for the transit police, which he did. He was a lieutenant at the time, and then he became the assistant to the chief of department. And then, as we know through history, that Brad became the commissioner, and Jack retired and followed him and became a commissioner there. So,
and they made an even grander impact by bringing a lot of the great ideas from the transit police into the NYPD when they both got there in 1994. And I smile because, as far as the warrant squad is concerned, a lot of people don't realize at the time Chief Bratton, before he was Commissioner Bratton, did this, where they got a bus, literally a bus, to process in line with warrants arrestees. And this is, I found it here in a quick Google search here. This is what that bus looked like. They were able to get it commissioned, label it with the transit police decals, a light bar and everything. And if you were going to get processed and brought down to booking, this was the bus you were most likely put on.
They had that book. They had the bus where they could actually book you through the bus.
Mm-hmm. And I think this might be that bus.
Yeah, they were brought on the bus. They were booked. They were given desk appearance tickets, but they were fingerprinted, photographed. Everything was processed right on the bus.
Yeah.
Step off the bus and go about your business.
Yeah. He says it best. It was the bus. Yeah.
At Bratton, he was the chief of department at the time. He made a lot of innovations. He increased the fleet of cars. He had them all repainted. He changed the firearms, which was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
He got the 9mm, and that was a fight with City Hall. They said, no 9mm. And he said, I don't fall under City Hall. I'm getting those 9mm. And I was actually part of the pilot program. In fact, the firearm I carry every day was my issued firearm back in that time from the transit police.
Right, because there's a few different, little quick aside before we continue with your career, there's a few different moving parts with this. Scott Goodell got killed in '86 in a gun battle because some scumbag ran up behind him, shot him in the back of the head. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's when we started to get the reloaders.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't reload his gun in time. That's when we used to keep them in a pouch, roll them out, put them in one at a time. 6-shot revolver.
Right. Which, unfortunately, in those situations, Scott did nothing wrong. He was working with what he had. It's not his fault some man killed him. But he, again, that's not going to help in a situation like that. So you got that. Favorite thing I read from his latest book, The Profession, is, I think, and I don't know if it was Ben Ward, whoever it was at that time, Lee Out of Town Brown, said to him, well, if you do this, meaning if you go down to the range to train your officers on those Glocks and whatnot, you're not going to use our range. He's like, oh, no, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you this is what we're going to do. So he didn't care.
It was great, yeah.
It was great. And, of course, my favorite model of the transit police cars, as you guys saw just now, this is what they were looking like towards the end. Beauties, You knew it was a transit police car, especially once they got painted over based off the light bar. Because they had those Wayland light bars, I believe, back then in the late 80s into the early 90s, right through the merger. So, as you said, assigned a major case. This is 91, the night watch specifically.
Right. I was assigned to a major case night watch, and I went back to where I was as a detective. Now I was a detective supervisor. And, that was a great job. Of course, being the boss is always good. But we had a lot of cases, and the case I explained to you earlier with the kidnapping and the robbery and the token booths had some rape cases that stand out where we were fortunate enough to be able to track the guy through by the end of the tour. If we major case at night watch, what we do is, and the same when I was in the homicide night watch, if you don't complete the case by the end of the night, it gets given to the daytime. But during the night, we cover everything from felony assaults to the robberies, guns, to the murders, to the stabbings, to the boot stick-ups. You get every case. So every night is pretty much busy. And then the accidental deaths or anybody that passes away on a train, they all have to be investigated.
Right. It's very involved, because the thing to remember is, if you committed the crime on the transit system, it still counts. I don't know why these guys had it through their head. Well, it doesn't count. Listen, above ground is one thing, down here. No. It counts all the same. And that was one of the great things about what you guys were doing, which is you did it on the transit system. The NYPD is at least your problems. You're going to deal with us.
Well, what's funny? Crime in the subway was always high, but, there was no social media. There was no YouTube. There was no cell phones. Not like today where everything is reported today. Nothing is a secret anymore.
No.
And back then it wasn't publicized. You would think that the subways were the safest place to be, unless you rode them every day and you knew better. But, now you hear about everything. It was happening the same way it does today, only tenfold.
Right.
These things of people being pushed in front of trains, that's nothing new. Everyone thinks that's, wow, this is starting to happen. This has been happening for 50 years. Right.
There were times where the ebbs and flows of it, some decades, some years would be higher than others, some years would be lower than others. But I've said before, I'll say it again. We're having this conversation in 2026. Turn back the clock to 1996, 1986. Imagine if we had Twitter, Facebook, Instagram back then, that you could you could record these things in real time. Again, it would put a lot of what we see today to shame, because the city was really chaotic back then. It's not doing the best these days. But if you think now it's bad, imagine back then.
Yep.
Yeah, it's come a long way. And your generation of cops certainly went through it. So Night Watch was a year, 92, and I imagine it's a little bittersweet because I know you love Major Case. But in 92, you end up going to District 12 and supervised that detective squad through about 94, 95.
Right. Now, I went there because my lieutenant was transferred there, and he wanted to take me with him.
Okay.
And I went there. And again, we handled just about all cases, except like if we had a homicide, then the homicide squad or a major case would pick up the cases. But we handled our robberies. We handled our knifings, stabbings, and any felony assaults, rapes. We handled all those cases. A lot of the rapes, if they were very serious, went to the special victim squad. And my detective would work hand in hand with them in those cases too. But one of the cases I remember that stood out from District 12 detectives, we had a case, we called it the Pelham Parkway Flasher. We had a guy that was flashing himself to high school students at one of the schools. It was a Catholic school on Pelham Parkway. And I was able to take one of our female detectives. I was able to get a uniform from the school and dress her up as one of the students. And I had Detective Robles, this was Detective Breen, who later retired as a lieutenant, and myself. I used my own private car. I had a 69 Skylark. And I used that as the department car for the day. And I did surveillance from the street. She went down to the station, and Detective Robles was on the station with her to keep an eye on her. And within 5 minutes of setting everything up, the guy came down, flashed himself, and then took off running when Detective Robles identified himself. And chased him he went into a subway tunnel, but I knew he was going to wind up at the other end. So I drove my car to that end. And when he came out of the subway, he kept looking back. There was nobody behind him. He felt all comfortable. And I jumped out of the car, and I had my 9mm pointed at him. So I'm going to get to the floor. And he said, "I'm a sick man. I'm sorry I did this." And he thought that I was the parent of one of the students. He thought I was going to kill him for it. He was happy to learn that I was a police officer. But that case went on for that was about a month that these kids were being flashed. And I actually got an award from the Society of Cruelty to Children uh, for that arrest. That became a big deal. It actually became nationwide news because of our undercover operation, and it was in newspapers in California and the whole bit. It seemed like a very simple case, and we closed it relatively quickly, but it became national news because of using a female undercover as a student.
And this is what we call job security. And that's, like I said, the decoys back then. I hate to say it, but now certain guys are good at it. A lot of guys, they stick out like a sore thumb when I see some of the photos. Like the whole neighborhood knows you're a cop. It's one thing if you're working plain clothes. Okay, you're kind of, that makes sense if people know who you are. So I can understand that. But some of these undercovers, man, it's a little bit harder for them to be discreet. But back then, I mean, you got guys in transit. There was a great story it's on YouTube around right before the merger, 1994, 1995. They could pass for middle school students. They could because they were so young looking for high school students. And that decoy unit, now those were actual decoys.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They blended in perfectly.
No, they did a great job. That was Jack Maple's unit, the decoy unit.
Yep, and there's a great iconic photo. I wish I could find it. I'll try to find it before the show's over.
That with the top hat.
Yeah, and he got like an orange suit, he got a cigar. It's a great photo. I'm going to try to find it in the meantime. That brings us into 1995. Now, this is towards the end of your career. We'll get to your retirement in 96 and what you've been up to since then. But 95, the merger hits in April. It had been talked about for a while. It's nothing that necessarily came out of the blue. Giuliani.
Yeah, it wasn't a secret.
Yeah, it wasn't a secret. Giuliani got his way because a few mayors before him, people forget, and I kind of talked about this with one of the guys that was on previously. Koch had tried. He got slammed down in court, went terribly for him. Dinkins tried, and Dinkins really got slammed down in court, and that went terribly for him too because the unions were strong on both ends. Rather you agree with the tactics or not, this is not the point of me bringing it up. I'm just saying what he did. Rudy basically held the MTA by the you-know-what and said, okay, well, I'm not going to pay them because the city had control of the payrolls which pretty much forced the hand, as I remember correctly, of the MTA to say, or the Transit Authority rather, to say, okay, fine, you'll get your wish, we'll merge with you, we'll become the NYPD Transit Bureau. Now, before we get into you going into Bronx homicide, great opportunity for you. A little bittersweet, though, because transit was all you known to that point.
Not really, because I had been detached for 5 years.
That's true.
And I worked a lot with, joint operations, joint investigations with precincts, joint task forces with their anti-crime units. And I worked, back in the day, we didn't book at transit districts when I first came on the job. You had to go into a precinct if you made an arrest. And being highly active, I was always in the 3-4 precinct, the 3-2 precinct, the 2-8 precinct, 3-0 precinct. So I got to know a lot of the cops and become friendly with them and socialize with them. So it really wasn't anything dramatic for me or new to me. And eventually we would book on our own commands. But all the paperwork was repetitious. That's why one of the merging was important, because we were doing the same thing that the precinct was doing, only you're doing twice the paperwork. Plus the precinct had to get their records and we had to do our records.
Yeah, redundancy.
So, I could have the paperwork done in 2 hours. Now it's taking me 3 hours because I have to do another form or type another form for another agency. It really didn't make a lot of sense. It was cost effective. And like you said, we worked for transit, but the transit was paid by the city to maintain the police department. So it didn't make sense to pay transit. You might as well just have everybody in one agency. So Giuliani saw that. He was able to bargain well with it and get it done. And I think most of the people on transit, although they were, transit was a close-knit agency. You knew everybody because it was a smaller agency. And I think our bosses were all pretty good. They worked well with you. There were a few here and there that people didn't get along with, but for the most part, we all stuck together and worked well together. I think for the most part, the cops themselves wanted to merge because it didn't cut back on their activity, and it gave them a position where they could move to other units. Transit had, X amount of units to go to, where NYPD, you have 100 units to go to.
Right.
And a lot of guys I know went to highway patrol, they went to narcotics, they went to canine. they did a lot of things that wouldn't have been open for them had it just remained transit police.
Right. The career path for a lot of guys that came over with transit and housing, which followed suit a month later in May of 95, in that particular merger, it expanded to such a degree that, as you said, would have never been possible. A good buddy I thought of just now, Jeff Oberdeer, he was a housing cop, but Jeff was an EOD guy in the Air Force. Where do you think he went in 1995 once the merger happened? The bomb squad. And that was a natural progression for him. Had he just stayed the housing police, would he have had that opportunity? Probably not,
Probably not, right.
So it was a good thing in terms of reducing, listen, I get both sides of the argument, but it was a great thing in terms of reducing redundancy and making things more efficient, to where I think even Knight just said it in 2004, and in retrospective, about 10 years after the merger, they said, yeah, you know what, this has helped a lot. This has helped a lot.
Yeah, and I think it was tougher on the sergeants and lieutenants that never worked in a precinct on the desk,
right?
Because there was just so much more you had to be aware of. And I'll tell you a little secret that nobody knew. I never once, even as a sergeant, worked a desk. When I got promoted to sergeant, I went into a specialized unit, the Citywide Patrol Services, and I never worked a desk. I got moved from there to the Canine Emergency Unit. Then I made detective sergeant, and if I went behind a desk, I'd be totally lost. I mean, I knew what the blotter was. I knew certain security things to check, but I never worked a desk and I was a sergeant for 13 years.
Right. I mean, you were out there. That's a lot of the reason why you're able to have the respect that you did. And if you were working at a desk, somebody might look at you and say, "Are you hurt? You injured?" So it's a good thing that you were able to get out there as much as you did. Now, besides Bronx Homicide, which was again the Night Watch for you, a familiar spot, 4-7 Detective Squad in the Bronx, 5-0 Detective Squad in the Bronx. How long were you there at each?
4-7. I was only there less than a month. I went there. I went to some training while I was there, and then they had an opening in the 5-0, which they were replacing the sergeant there. So they sent me over there, which was good for me because it was closer to where I lived. I lived in Yonkers at the time. And a little bit of a conflict with the commanding officer there. He was a sergeant, I was a sergeant, but he was considered the CO. And he didn't know me personally. And he kind of spoke down to me as coming from transit. You don't know what to do. You don't know this. And then a couple of detectives told him, listen, this guy was a detective. This guy was in several shootings. This guy has been wounded. This guy, they spoke up for me. And he didn't want to hear it. He told me, you're not going out on cases with guys. I heard you like to be in the street. You're not going out. You're here to be a supervisor and you handle clerical administrative work. And I told him, okay, but I went out. I like going out with the guys. That was something I always did, whether it was in warrants, as a squad boss in major case. I went out on all the cases. I never sat back. That just wasn't my personality. It wasn't like the way I worked. And that's why people gave me respect, because they knew that I would get involved in any case they were in. And in warrants, nobody ever went through a door before me. That was how I worked. And we had a little bit of conflict, and an opening came up in Bronx warrants. I put in for it, and I was fortunate enough to get it. And that's where Bronx Homicide. And that's where I went to the Homicide Squad. And I enjoyed working there. The chief of the borough, he was a little tough, but I worked there. And the reason I retired, I liked working there, and I had a good position. But my daughter was being born. My ex-wife was a police officer. I had my time in, and that's why I ended my career, was to be a stay-at-home dad. And my son was born a year later, so I was a stay-at-home dad to 2 kids for 6 years.
Wow. Because I was going to ask you, I'm like, you're having the time of your life, at this juncture. And again, great spot. I know in your brother's case, injuries ended his career prematurely. I know he had the accident, which cut him short. In your instance, I mean, listen, totally respectable decision. I know it couldn't have been easy, but when you got 2 little ones at home, hey, listen, that trumps everything.
Well, I'll tell you, while I was out on what we call terminal leave, I don't know if a lot of your listeners know what terminal leave is, but when you hit your 20th year, you get 60 days that you could take off when you're retiring to decide if you like to be retired or not. And I had 70 days because I had vacation time, and I had 23 years, so it was a couple of days added. And I got very sick in those 70 days, and nobody really knew why. My body started to shut down. I wound up in the hospital. My blood pressure was 230 over 160. I was going to have a stroke. And we didn't speak about it, but in 1991, I was shot. And to this day, I have a bullet lodged in my chest. And they attributed my high blood pressure to that incident. So that became a line to do the incident. So I filed for disability retirement, and I still left the job with service time. But a year and a half after I was out, I was awarded a disability pension.
And this was in the Bronx?
I was injured in the Bronx, yes. That was while I was assigned to the robbery task force.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this is so we had the shooting, of course, that we talked about earlier, 6 weeks out of the academy. And let's get into some of them so we don't miss them. And then we'll talk about your book before we get to the rapid fire. 77, somebody tries to kill you. That gunman there. And that was the first thing. Well, right after the academy, post-academy incident, that was the other thing, too. 77, somebody shot at you. Yeah, when I got rehired after the layoffs, I was in anti-crime. We worked a noon till 8 o'clock shift. And we had to park our cars. We didn't have a parking garage. We had a street that we would park on. And Tommy and I would always leave together, Tommy McGurl. But he was on a phone call, and I said, listen, I got to get home. I'm leaving. And I went up the subway stairs. I came out on 146th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. And I was walking with a veteran cop. He had about 8 years on the job, a guy named Pat. And I saw a guy with a gun in his hand across the street outside of what we thought was a social club. And I said, Pat, the guy has a gun. Take a position here. And he crouched down and stayed on the same side of the street that we were. And I ran across the street, behind this guy, and I was sneaking up on him. He had his gun up in the air like if he was a lookout. And as I got to just grab it out of his hand, my left foot hit the old rolled down gates in front of stores. It hit the lock on the bottom of the gate, and it rattled the gate. And he just spun around, and he put the gun was right in my face. I mean, I don't know if you ever spoke to anybody, but they say, the gun looked like a cannon in front of him. That's what it looked like. All I saw was the barrel of the gun, and he fired, and I could hear the hammer click and hit the round, but the gun didn't fire. He had a misfire. And then he did it again, real quick, in succession, and it clicked again. And then he started to run, but he ran into the street, and there was a bunch of kids jumping rope and playing hopscotch, and I couldn't fire at him. I was yelling, drop the gun, drop the gun. And as he passed the kids, he realized I'm on 146th Street and nothing's in front of me but the pavement and parked cars. And I fired a warning shot, which of course was against department regulations, but I didn't want to shoot him in the back either. So I fired the warning shot, and he threw the gun to the street, put his hands up, dropped to his knees. He says, I don't have the gun, I don't have the gun, I don't have the gun. And as it turns out, he was 16 years old. He had bought the gun down the street for $10, and he wanted to shoot his brother in the leg, who was shooting pool in this club when he came out because they had an argument. So I recovered the gun. It was a .32. It was loaded with 3 rounds, 2 of which it was a 5-shot revolver, but 2 of the rounds had indented primers, which were the 2 rounds he fired at me. The third one was still a live round. As you know, we would hand deliver a firearm to the ballistics section to be tested once we vouched it. So after the arrest, in which his mother came down to the district and actually thanked me for not killing him, because supposedly witnesses said, oh man, that cop could have killed him. So she gave me a hug for not killing her son. And then he was booked. I took the gun down to the ballistics section. And the third round, they tested they fired it, and the third round fired into the tub. So had the bullets been loaded in a different sequence, and we fired and hit that round, I may not be telling you the story today. Right. But I was very fortunate that he hit the 2 dead prime, two he hit, never fired because there was old ammunition. The gunpowder had hardened, and it wouldn't fire. But the third round did fire. My goodness. I mean, it's the little things like that add up over the course of a career. It's those hits and misses. Someone watching over you. Yeah. And we'll continue to chronicle those incidents momentarily. Just a couple guys are saying hi to you. Emilio Velez, who worked District 12 warrants. Oh, great cop. Yeah, he was in the warrant squad with me. Great cop. And what was that? Great detective also. Got a Medal of Valor. Oh, really? Okay. All right. Good to see you, Emilio. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Hope you're enjoying the show. Billy Dempsey, who was an emergency guy as well. He was an ESU cop. So, Stu,
Yep.
cop, gentleman, old District 1.
Yep, great guy.
Yeah, I like trying to get Billy on the show. Billy's shy, but hopefully I can get him on the show for my
He should get on there, yeah.
I know he's got some stories too. So 86, you're a very busy guy because first, of course, we'll get to the tragic murder of Detective Venditti, which that whole case was, and that's not your fault, it's the courts. That was a disgrace. But before that, you had an off-duty intervention in Yonkers for a stabbing.
Yeah, I was off duty. That was in that was in 80, and that was also in 1986. I was out to dinner with my girlfriend at the time, who happened to be a recruit in the academy. And we were in a restaurant, and we heard some screaming, and I see a girl lift up a knife, and she was stabbing at this other girl. So I intervened, ran over, grabbed her. I said, police. I was a sergeant at the time. I had my shield out. I said, police officer. And she just turned and stabbed right down at me, and I put my hand up in front of to protect my face. She stabbed me in the palm. But that angered me. Your adrenaline kicks in. You don't feel the pain.
Yeah.
So I was able to grab her around the head and throw her to the floor and disarm her. My girlfriend at the time wrapped my hand up. She got towels, wrapped it up, and I held the girl down. So I locked her up for obviously felony assault on the female that she had cut and myself. And she was removed by the Yonkers police to their central booking. And while I was there, they told me someone's looking for you outside. And I said, who's looking for me, So I opened the door, and it was this other girl, and she said, listen, my friend was arrested by you. Can I get the knife back? And I said, that was your knife? She said, yeah. I said, you gave her the knife? And she says, yeah. I said, knowing that she was going to use it against that other girl? She said, yeah. She said, give me the knife. I want to stab her. So I grabbed her and brought her right into central booking too.
Job security.
Yeah. So she couldn't believe she was being arrested. So I locked her up also for solicitation, giving her the needs to do the crime.
Yeah, right to you. If only all collars could be that easy, right?
Yeah, you can't. Those are stories you can't make up. Those are things that really happen.
Yeah, I gave her the murder weapon. Sure.
So anyway, I caught a couple of stitches, and that was just another injury I got.
I mean, and I'm sure Yonkers was happy to tell the woman in question, hey, by the way, that guy you stabbed, he's a cop.
Yeah.
So double whammy. If you can laugh about that. Venditti, this was at the beginning of 86. For those of you, most of you in the audience are on the job, you know this story. Some of you are not and may not know this story. Anthony Venditti was investigating members of the mafia. And unless I have it incorrect, I don't know how it is outside of the States, but in the States, the general rule of thumb is you don't kill anybody in law enforcement because, in their line of work, not that it's noble. There's nothing the mafia does that's noble, but it brings more attention to them. Which is why when the DEA agent got killed in 89, they killed the guy that killed the DEA agent for bringing unnecessary attention and scrutiny to them. Apparently, these guys didn't follow that memo because poor Venditti and his partner are conducting some surveillance. He exits the car. These three wannabe tough guys push him up against a wall. A struggle ensues. His partner gets shot. He ends up getting shot and killed. And the guy, because for some reason, I don't know why, and I don't know what the courts were thinking, the guy that killed Detective Venditti ends up getting acquitted. This was such a tragic one because we still don't have answers to this day, 40 years later, as to what the heck happened that night. And you were one of the officers or detectives at that time. Actually, you were a sergeant at this time involved in the grid search.
Yeah, well, I was a sergeant. That's when I had the canine unit and the emergency unit. And they requested a canine because the NYPD didn't have canine at that time. Trans was the first to have canines in the city. So they requested a canine. I had a canine officer I picked up. And we went out there. We got an escort by Highway Patrol. We got to the scene relatively quick. And as you can imagine, it was a chaotic scene. You have an officer down. You have an officer killed. It was, one of those tough scenes. You don't like to see that stuff. And they were looking for the firearm. And the dogs were trained to do these searches. And we were involved in that search. I myself wasn't involved in the search. But of course, I did canvassing with I was a uniform sergeant at the time, did canvassing with other officers to try to locate witnesses because it was right outside a diner. And that was my part in that. I didn't have any part in the investigation itself, but the canine officer was instrumental in trying to find evidence. I don't believe they found the firearm there at the time, but there were other articles that were located. Unfortunately, like you said, the defendant was acquitted in that case.
All three of them.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
But that brought a lot of pressure onto the organized crime. Similar into the case, which I know you'll get to, but when I was shot, the person that shot me was a wannabe, and he thought it would be a good idea to shoot a police officer, and that worked pretty much against him.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't understand, and we've seen instances like it happen, not just in your case or in New York City, but across the board, where if you're going to do illegal things and you're going to live that way of life, whether it be the mafia, whether it be a street gang, whatever, the goal is to fly under the radar and not get noticed by the police. Because guys think, well, I'm going to make a statement, and in the process, okay, not only does an innocent person get hurt, but in the process, again, looking at it, Darwinism at its finest or at its worst, depending on how you look at it, you're bringing undue attention onto the very people you're trying to impress.
Yeah, of course, exactly.
It doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't accomplish anything at all. And that segues perfectly, you mentioned it earlier, into the Eddie Byrne case. Because, I mean, they were trying to make a statement in that instance in terms of they were going after the informant. If you want to, I mean, you shouldn't be trying to kill anybody, obviously, goes without saying, but it's one thing to go and try to kill an informant. Okay. I'm not saying it's justified, but you can at least from an investigative standpoint rationalize. Okay, he was going to rat him out. They got to him before he could do so. Killing a cop sitting in a marked patrol car at that, which the NYPD still has, by the way,
That's
to
right.
really drive the point home.
Yeah, they actually restored it.
And it's the car that he was sitting in that night when that tragedy happened on February 26th of 88. Killing a cop sitting in a marked patrol car, besides the fact that it's one of the more cowardly things that you can do because he never saw it coming. Again, what did they think they were going to accomplish? And it was your team that was able to bring down, again, I'm not going to mention the scumbag's name, but we all know who we're talking about, one of the shooters involved.
Yeah, one of the shooters involved. I was in the warrant squad as a sergeant at that point.
Mm-hmm.
The entire warrant division was sent out to Queens in response to that homicide. As were, all detectives. You can imagine how many people came down on that neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And our job was to, enforce every single warrant, whether it was trespassing the subway up to murder. There was no holding back. And each warrant team had a sergeant. I was with a team of detectives. And we were given a list of people to go to. Each person that we apprehended on that list, I was to call a specialized number. I guess it was a hotline number to a task force. And I would give the information as to who we apprehended. And they would say, okay, just take him to the court. When I apprehended this particular person, me and the other two detectives, they said, okay, take him to court and charge him with bail jump, which it's a legitimate charge, but it's very rarely enforced because that's just more paperwork. Normally you just bring the wanted subject right to the court part and where the warrant was returnable to. In this case, I knew right then and there that we had somebody that they wanted to get a line on. And during the course of that booking, they were able to get surveillance teams set up. And when we eventually had him released on the bail jump charge, the surveillance teams followed him, and that was one of the shooters in the case. And they eventually were able to track who he went to, who he phone calls went to, and break the case open and make all the arrests.
It was a turning point, and one of the more iconic images to emerge from that is at the time President George Herbert Walker Bush 41. He had his badge. He was given, I believe, by Eddie Byrne's parents, Eddie Byrne's badge, and I think he kept it in the Oval Office until the end of his presidency.
Yes, well, Eddie Byrne's dad was a retired lieutenant.
Yeah. His brother was a longtime deputy commissioner. He's since passed away, sadly. He was a longtime deputy commissioner in the NYPD. I believe his brother was a lawyer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was part of the law department. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He ended up assisting the NYPD for a long time. Yeah, again, like Irma, he's not forgotten either. It's been 38 years in his case. It'll be 39 next February. Hard to believe, but that was definitely a turning point in the battle for New York City. And what was a losing battle at the time eventually turned into a winning one when it came to crime. And we'll talk about your shooting in a moment. And yes, we will talk about your book. I'm not going to forget about it before the rapid fire. But I didn't realize this. 1991, I've done a show on it. Rick Martinez, who was in the chat, was on the show because he responded that night as a member of the emergency service unit. The Union Square derailment, which occurred at that time, I believe, and I believe the railman was intoxicated, as I recall it, and that ended up causing the accident. I mean, listen, one life lost is one too many, but if you look at the facts of it, the fact that only 5 people lost their lives that night is a miracle considering what happened. I mean, it was terrible. I didn't realize until we were talking off the air, and now we'll talk about it now. You were one of the guys that was there that night.
Yeah, I was a detective sergeant in the Major K squad. I heard there was a derailment, so I dispatched a team over there. Actually, a team was out with another sergeant, and they responded there. And they called me back, a couple of minutes later and said, listen, this is not a derailment. This is a disaster. You got to get here. Mm-hmm. And my office wasn't far away, shot over the bridge. So I was pretty much one of the first responders on the scene. And it was quite a scene. It was something out of a movie. You go down into the subway, you see those pillars. You don't expect them to be bent. You see a train car. You don't expect it to be torn open like a sardine can.
Yeah.
People lying on the tracks, people lying on the platform with compound fractures and split skulls. And I mean, it looked to me like, I guess I've never been to a plane crash, but I've been to a plane crash with multiple victims. I'm talking in the 100 victims. That's what it was like. It was just like one of these movies scenes where there's just tragedy and disaster all over. And, we set up a triage center. We started to, treat victims until all EMS were there and FDNY was there, and just hundreds of first responders, of course, came. My job as a squad sergeant at this point, I was pulled off from helping people. They wanted to send a team out to locate the conductor of the train. He was missing. So my team, and we shot out to his residence, which was in the Bronx, Riverside Towers, if you're familiar with it, in the 4th floor precinct. We got there, we spoke to his wife. She said she hadn't heard from him. She knew on the news there was an accident. She didn't know it was him. And she hopes he's okay. As it turns out, he was actually sitting across the street watching all the first responders respond to the scene. He went home later on and was apprehended by a team that I kept there to keep surveillance for him. And he was arrested. He was later convicted. 5 people that lost their lives. I believe he was convicted of manslaughter. I don't know if he was convicted of homicides.
It was manslaughter that ended up getting him imprisoned in that case.
And there was 162 people, I think, that received serious injuries. Yeah, that was, it's another scene that stays in your mind. You can't get those scenes out of your head.
No.
These are just, but it's like anything else. You react, you're trained to react to them, and you do your job.
Right. You kind of compartmentalize, and the adrenaline's going too, which also helps in a situation like that. And an ironic twist, and this was about 11 years ago, I don't know if he lived, but the motorman that was in charge that night, that was drinking in the first place and somehow ended up still being on the train, he got hit by a car. And I think he ended up in a coma, like back in 2015.
Is that poetic justice?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, man, it kind of caught up with him. The law of averages, Murphy's Law kicked in.
Karma. That's a good thing.
Got him about 24, 25 years after the fact. That, again, I don't know if he lived or died as a result of getting hit by that car, but he was very critically wounded at the time. And, we'll talk about your shooting in a moment, but this is, we know suicide by cop from the standpoint that somebody can end it.
Yeah, that was an interesting case that I had.
Yes. Usually they antagonize the officer to shoot them. This guy or gal, you'll tell me, disarmed the cop and shot himself.
What happened was we got the job as a suicide, but by use of a police officer's gun. So the first thing I thought was in somebody's home, maybe. But as it turns out, it was a uniformed cop, South Ferry Station, just out of the academy, working with a field training officer at the time. A guy came up to him and asked directions. Didn't draw any suspicions, just said, hey, how do I get to this subway station? So the cop took out a subway map, which he kept in his memo book binder. And the field training officer, just walked a few feet ahead. And a moment later, he heard a gunshot. This guy, when the officer was looking at the map, was able to pull out the officer's gun from his holster. It was a left-handed officer, so it was on the left side of him. Raise the gun to his own head and kill himself. Unfortunate incident, but I'm glad he didn't shoot the officer because he had the same opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
But he just was out to kill himself. I responded with major case detectives, and on the body, once the ME was there, we searched the body, and all he had on him was a key from the St. George Hotel in Staten Island. No other identification, no other paperwork, no money, no nothing. So my partner, well, I was with a lieutenant at the time. We drove out to St. George Hotel, Staten Island. We actually took the ferry over. And we interviewed the crew. Nobody knew this guy. We went to the hotel. We got the hotel clerk to come with us to open the door because we don't know if there's other bodies in there or not. We don't know what the story is. We opened the door slowly, and you could see the room was in disarray. Chair was knocked over. There was a light on the ceiling which was pulled down. There was a chair knocked over. The bed was a mess. There was a empty bottle of alcoholic beverage, liquor, that was tilted over. There was an empty prescription bottle that was emptied. Walked into the bathroom. There was no bodies in the room, but we could see in the bathroom where there was a razor blade on the bathroom sink where he had slit his wrists because there was blood drippings all over. Inside the shower was a chair with the clock radio in the shower. So what we were able to figure out was that first he tried to hang himself from the light on the ceiling. He had tied his belt up there, and his weight brought the whole thing down. He wasn't successful. He took all his pills. He drank all the liquor. Apparently, he woke up from that. Didn't die from that. He took the clock radio, plugged it in the bathroom, put it into the shower with him, took a shower, but he couldn't electrify himself. So that didn't work. He cut his wrists, but they were more like hesitation marks than a full cut down.
Yeah.
And he bled into the sink. Then he got he got himself dressed and left the room. There was money left on the floor, coins and a couple of bills. And we decided, okay, we call crime scene to take pictures of the room. So crime scene was responding. And when they got there, the crime scene detective, he took a chair and he repositioned it after he photographed it. You have to have it the way it was. And he stood up on the chair and he said, look at these coins. And what they did was they spelt out a phone number. So he wrote down the phone number, which we didn't notice it did. Went into the office of the hotel, and it was actually the number to the Beth Israel psychiatric department. But they were closed at night. This was during the midnights. So crime scene was left at the scene to complete their investigation and their processing. And my partner, the lieutenant, got back in the car, and we took the ferry back to the scene. And we talked to a cop that was assigned to the ferry. And I said, hey, did you ever see this guy? And I showed him the picture. He goes, boy, it's funny. He showed me that guy. I saw that guy earlier. He was on the very front of the bow of the boat. And I called him back. He was in the restricted area. I said, what are you doing? He says, I just wanted a better view. And I said, he killed himself when he got to South Ferry. He goes, oh, my God, I guess he was going to jump off the front of the boat.
Probably.
And I said, I guess so. But the cops saw him and called him back. So there were all these ways he had tried to kill himself, and he didn't succeed. But he made himself to the South Ferry from the boat, and this is where he ran into the cop. And he was able to get this cop's gun after asking directions and kill himself. But the interesting part was, as a cop, you have to safeguard your equipment.
Right.
And this cop is in serious trouble. He could lose his job. But as it turned out, he was a left-handed cop, and the department in the equipment section, when he was graduating from Gun and Shield Day, they didn't have a left-handed holster for him. So they wanted him to get out on time, so they got one from the range. Now, the one at the range was used so many times in training that the safety mechanism apparently wasn't working, which was unbeknownst to them. They gave him a holster, which they thought was good. But after examination by the firearms unit after the incident, they determined really wasn't the officer's fault. The safeguards in the holster they were worn down and not working.
Right.
So he just happened to find the only left-handed officer with a holster that was not operational.
It's not a
Uh,
laughing matter, but man, the guy was really
no,
determined to end things, wasn't he?
no, but it's fortunate for the police officer that
Yes.
he didn't lose his job. It was not his fault.
Right.
It was just the circumstances. This guy was going to kill himself somehow.
Somewhat.
Had he not run into the officers, he probably would have jumped in front of the next train coming into the station.
Exactly. Right. Traumatic experience for that officer for sure, because that's not something you envision happening when you sign on to start your tour.
Of
But
course.
at least he didn't lose his life, nor did he lose his job in that rather tragic incident. We talked about one of the shootings earlier, but again, shot in the arm and chest. And I know that played a role in ultimately you retiring in '96 as well, besides becoming a dad.
Yeah. Well, what happened in that incident, I was in the robbery task force. I was with my partner, Tom McGraw. We were actually off duty at the time, but it was 1:30 in the morning. We were in the Bronx. We were driving down the street, Taylor Avenue, and we saw three guys about our age. We were in our 20s at the time. They crossed in front of my car, but they did it in a jog. They were running across, and I was only coming down the street at less than 10 miles an hour. And we looked over and we saw an older fella going into a building, and it looked like they were following this guy. So we said, could that be a robbery? And when we say older, he was 40 years old, and when you're 20, that's like really old. So he was going into the building, and when he entered the vestibule, then he went charging in. So we said, this is a robbery, and this is what we were in. We were in the robbery task force. So we jumped out of the car, ran into the hallway, and they were on top of him, beating him and kicking him.
Jeez.
So we identified ourselves as police officers. We had our shields out, took our guns out. We put the three of them on the wall. And as it turns out, they were actually just beating him because he was a bouncer in a club, and he had thrown them out the night before for improper dress. So this was a retaliation beating. The victim didn't want to press charges. We weren't going to arrest him for, hitting the guy. The guy wasn't beat badly. He didn't even have a bruise on him at this point because we got in there so quickly. And we just said, listen, guys, what are you doing? They said, hey, we just want to do this, that. We said, no problem. Everybody just get out of here. So we left it at that. We walked back to our cars. They walked out of the building, and the guy went up to his apartment where he lived. Well, we got into my car. We drove around the block, and we were on Westchester Avenue. And as we were coming down Westchester Avenue, a car came quick in front of mine, threw a stop sign, and kind of like cut me off. And then we stopped, and when I looked at the driver, he pulled door to door to me, and I realized this is one of the guys from the hallway. And he was telling me, put down my window, and I put up my hands like, what do you want? And then I saw a gun come up, and I raised my left arm to cover my face, and I heard the shot. And the first shot hit my door. The second shot hit me in the tricep.
Ooh.
The third shot hit the headrest. But the shot that hit me in the tricep, the bullet traveled up into my chest. I didn't know exactly where I was hit. I felt on fire, from the heat of the round.
Right.
It's a question I'm asked quite often, like, what did it feel like? And it actually, I didn't feel pain. I actually felt anger because I was like, this guy shot me for no reason. I was mad. So I jumped out of the car and I drew my gun, which I kept in my waistband. But I kept my car in drive. I never put it in park. It started to roll towards the L structure. We were under an L structure. And Tommy, my partner, got out, and he fell over because the car was in motion. It kind of pushed him off of balance. And he yelled, the car, the car. So there was a girl in the car with the shooter, and she had yelled his name. And she was leaning over to him. So I didn't want to shoot through the rear windshield and maybe hit her. But I got the plate number. I was able to jump back in the car, stop my car before it struck the L pillar. Tommy said, are you okay? I said, no, I'm hit. He ran around the car, pushed me in through my side. I had a bench seat in that car. And he drove me to Jacoby Hospital. By the time I got to the hospital, I was, the adrenaline's wearing off, so my whole body was in pain. I didn't even know, where I was really hit. I knew I was bleeding from the arm because I felt all the blood coming, dripping down. But I felt pain throughout my whole body. I didn't know the bullet was in my chest. They rushed me right in, of course. Police officer shot, went over the air. Cops came to the hospital. Cops responded to the scene. The way the investigation went, they were able to trace the plate. They shot out to Suffolk County where the plate went back to. They went to a residence. This happened at 1:30 in the morning. So like 3 in the morning, they were at these people's homes. And they were like, we don't know anything about a car or registered to us. And back in those days, there was no computerization of license plates and registrations. Everything was kind of like hand done at the Department of Motor Vehicle. It was very easy to get plates sent to somebody else's house if you grabbed them out of the mailbox or something. That's apparently what was done. The car was found afire earlier in the morning, but the inspection sticker on the car was still intact. So they traced the inspection sticker, and it went back to a truck that was registered in the Hunts Point market of the Bronx. So the detectives went to the Hunts Point market, located the company that it was registered to, and they found there was 6 trucks parked there, one which was missing an inspection sticker. So they spoke to the manager, and they said, listen, who drives these trucks? And they gave him a list of the people, and they said, the same drivers drive the same truck, so they switched it around. They said, no, the same driver drives the truck every day. They said, well, who drives this truck? And they gave him the name, and he said, that's the name that I had, first name. And the manager said, well, it's funny, he just called in sick today. So now we knew who we were looking for. And detectives, cops from my unit, I was in the robbery squad, so my whole unit was assigned to it. They all went down to this neighborhood, which was Country Club area in the Bronx. And they shut down all the social clubs, ticketed every parked car. Anybody with a warrant for jaywalking got arrested. They shut down the whole neighborhood. And they said, until this guy shows up at the precinct, turns himself in, this is going to go on every day. Nobody makes no money. Nobody can park their car. Nobody better speed. Everybody better stop for the stop sign. So, of course, he was convinced to turn himself in, which he did the next day.
Wow. And again, all for nothing. All for nothing.
All for nothing. And I was very fortunate. The bullet traveled up through my tricep into my chest and never hit anything vital. I was out of the hospital in 2 days. I would have been out in 1 day. They kept me for security purposes. But the next day, I never needed any surgery.
Good.
But that bullet is still in me 46 years later.
Wow. And you just never know, because I was thinking, I was comparing while you were telling it in my head, where my head went to as you were telling the story was comparing it with Kevin Gillespie in '96. Same scenario. He was a street crime cop himself. Yep. He came over from housing with the merger, stopped the guys, the shootout happened. Same thing. I think the bullet, hit, he was wearing a vest too, hit him in the armpit area, traveled through his chest just like that bullet in your case. Difference was, unfortunately, with him, it hit all the vital organs, and he didn't make it that night back in 1996. So you never know. You just never know. It's just ebbs and flows to it. But you were very fortunate. Now with the book, putting all this into written form as you did is not easy. To a lesser extent, I kind of had that problem when I was writing my first book, and even when writing the second book that's about to come out, because there's so many stories that have been told in this program. I'm like, which ones do I pick? Difference here is you live these things. So to try to pluck all these stories and say, man, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did that too. Shoot, how do I put that in the book? Oh man, I have to take this out then. What was your process? Because again, it came out great, but it's not, I know it's not easy to put together.
Well, I'll tell you the funny thing about that. I wrote that book. It came out, I think, July of 2023. Might be 3 years now that I wrote that book. I actually wrote it 25 some odd years ago. I wrote it when I was home with my kids. I was sitting at the computer. I had 2 kids in car seats. And I said, let me start putting my story together. And I just kept writing. I tried to put it in chronological order like it is in the book, my academy days and where I went through each unit. And I also added a lot of stories about people that I knew, similar to like Irma Lozada, people I worked with that were killed in the line of duty, people that were wounded seriously, people that were highly decorated. And I put all those stories in there. And I sent it out. After my brother wrote his book, everyone was telling me, write a book. And I just never got around to publishing it or doing it. But I sent the book out to a guy who was an author. And he went through it and he said, you got a great book here, but the average book is 70 to 90,000 words. You got like 600,000 words. He says, you got to cut this down. So I did. He said, make the book about yourself, not about all these other people. And that's what I did. I made the story kind of like an autobiography. And the people that I had spoken about, I actually was my second book, My Walk Amongst Heroes. And I made that book 3 months after I did the first book because I took all those stories out and made the second book. And, they both did very well, fortunately for me. And then, people that were killed are remembered, people I worked with. Um, I went to a lot of police funerals in my career, and I wanted those people to be remembered. They were friends of mine and people I knew, people I worked with closely.
They shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, we
No,
talk
never.
about Irma, and the day after Irma's anniversary this year is Bobby Venable's anniversary. Same
That's
story.
correct.
A go-getter young guy.
Yeah, I wrote about him in my book as well, my second book.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you did that again. This book that I'm fortunate enough to have is Beneath the Concrete Jungle, True Stories of a New York City Detective Sergeant. And I believe you have a website where people can get these books, correct?
They're all on Amazon. I don't have my own website. All of the books I have written are on Amazon, or you could just type my name in, Stu Friedman, followed by NYPD on Google. They'll all come up. And I appreciate you speaking about it.
Oh, no problem. Happy to help, happy to promote it, happy to have a copy of it, which is signed by one Stu Friedman, which I very much appreciate. So it is now time for the rapid fire, which we will get to after a word really quick from our friends over at Armor Tuff.
When it comes to firehouses, the floors take a beating. Boots, waters, tools, apparatus traffic, it just never stops. That's why departments like the Gloucester City, New Jersey Fire Department and so many others trust Armor Tuff Flooring and Tile. From the hallways to the training rooms to the apparatus bays, Armor Tuff delivers a clean, professional finish built to handle the daily grind of the job. Durable, seamless, and designed specifically for high-demand public safety environments, this isn't just flooring, it's infrastructure you can count on. And it doesn't stop at the floor. Take a look at the Grove's gear racks, built with integrated security features to protect turnout gear, personal equipment, and department assets. Secure storage, smart design, and built to last, because your gear deserves the same protection you provide to your community. If your department is ready to upgrade its space from the bay floor to the gear room, reach out to Armor Tuff Flooring and Tile, built for the fire service, built to last.
And as I look in the chat, Ed Murray, I gotta get you on the show, my friend. We got to do something real soon, so I'm going to reach out to you. Rapid Fire, of course, as sponsored by our friends over at Armor Tuff, is 5 hit-and-run questions from me, 5 hit-and-run answers from you. You can say pass if you want to. The first one, as it pertains to the investigative side, in a good way, which of the assignments would you say challenged you the most? Anti-crime, major case, warrants, or homicide?
Well, I'm going to say warrants because a lot of investigation goes into tracking these people. And there was one person we tracked for over a month. He was wanted for drug sales. He was wanted by the New Jersey State Police. He was convicted in absentia and was going to serve 25 years for heavy drug transactions and deals. And he was eventually caught. That was very satisfying. But it took a lot of work, a lot of stakeout work. We recovered firearms while in the process of looking for him, hitting different locations. It was a very interesting case. I found that to be my most rewarding assignment, was the warrant squad.
Very nice. And the second question I'm going to ask you, I'm going to flip it because usually when people say, what's the thing that sticks with you the most, it's said in a negative context. We're going to flip that into a positive context. Once again, in a good way. Out of all the things that you responded to over the course of your career, either because it was really funny or it was because it was really uplifting or a combination of the two, what's the one incident or incidents that you find yourself saying, you know what, that was really cool, or man, that was really fun?
Again, I got to go back to warrants because we did a lot of funny things. If you read through the book, you might remember somewhere we would impersonate a pizza delivery, and the people wouldn't open the door until I yelled out that it was paid for. Then they opened the door. That was pretty funny. I yelled down the hall. I remember saying, "Hey, you guys want this pizza? It's already paid for." And as soon as I said that, you could hear the locks unbolted. And as soon as the guy stepped out, of course, to get the pizza, he got grabbed.
Yeah, of course.
Another time, my partner, he imitated a dog barking, and we told the guy, we're going to let the dog in. We're going to have to break down the door and let the dog in. We knew he had a child in there. We had no dog. That was my partner barking like a dog. And then I got on the radio and I said, listen, I don't know if I want the guy with the shotgun on the fire escape. And he was like, shotgun on the fire escape, dog. My kid, he opened the door and surrendered, you know. And he was looking around. Where's the dog? Where's all these people? He thought there was like 12 of us. I said, we got you. He started laughing. He said, you guys are good, you know.
Hey, listen.
You know, funny things that you remember, you know.
Right. At least he was a gentleman about it, to his credit. You know, listen, he went in.
Yeah.
You know, didn't give you guys a hard time. You know, so tip of the cap to him. Hopefully, he used that to make better choices in life, especially for his kids' sake. Third question of the rapid fire. You know, looking back on it, although the merger was necessary, anybody that worked transit, anybody that worked housing could tell you how unique those respective agencies were. And it's a time in New York City that you never saw before. And of course, with the merger of 1995, you'll never see again. So for you and your personal experience since 21 of your 22 years in the job, were as a transit guy, what made the New York City Transit Police, from Stu Friedman's perspective, so unique?
It was unique in that there was good camaraderie. We had each other's back 99% of the time. I had one incident which was negative which is also in my book. But no, I mean, we stuck together. It was unique. There was unique training. We took actually a lot of martial arts training in the academy because you were by yourself, and they knew the radios didn't work. My training was much different than, like, my son's on the job now in Westchester County. He's on 7 years, my son David. His training is a lot different than the training I took. My training was, you have a nightstick, use it. You know, don't let people talk down to you. Don't let people spit on you. Today you see videos all the time, people throwing water at cops, berating cops. Never happened in my time. It never got to that level. 3 seconds into the videos that you watch today that go on for 20 minutes, that was over. You know, so that was a unique thing, you know, because we were trained. You can't make it more difficult for the next cop that's going to encounter this guy. This guy is going to learn from you that that's not how you act. And that's not how you treat police. And, you know, it was unique in that way. We were pretty much by ourselves. You couldn't count on the radio for help. And you had to be able to, if you were going to approach somebody, you have to be ready to kill them. That's pretty much how we were trained. Today, that's not the way. You know, today it's give hugs, run away, back up. Not in all jurisdictions, but the Northeast, at least, it is.
Oh, yeah. You go down south, it's night and day.
No, it's
night
kind
and day.
of how it was when we were, you know.
Right. As it should be. I'm not
That's
laughing.
why they call us old school, you know.
Of course, you know, and I wish that was still the way. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because Nicole, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Ciafone or Ciafone. I apologize if I'm not. She says you work with her dad. Yeah, my dad had a frozen eel instead of his nightstick. I'm just picturing that. Man. And Ed Murray's asking, Stu, what bagel shop in the Bronx did you work in before you got on the job as the bagel man?
Bagel Rammer on Creston Avenue and Kings Ridge Road.
There you go. All right. Fourth question of the rapid fire. If for somebody that just got their gold shield, you know, listen, you were an investigator for a majority of your career. What advice would you give them today based off your experiences?
Well, I followed the lead of the senior detectives. You know, they kind of knew the ins and outs of the detective squad. They had the connections with investigative technique. They knew who to contact on certain cases. You know, I did investigations with robberies. You're young, you think you know it all, but you really don't. So taking advice from senior detectives is always the best advice I can give to new detectives. And, you know, listen to your supervisors, listen to those senior detectives because they know their stuff.
Absolutely. And the final question of the rapid fire. Looking back, you know, it was a heck of a run, 74 to 96. You saw the city through multiple different eras. When you came on, it was the Wild West. By the time you left in 1996, the city was really turning around and heading towards a much better era. So as you look back on all these different things, on duty and off, that was just incredible to live through. What are you proudest of?
I'm proud. The proudest thing I am is that I left a good impression with the people I worked with. You know, I'm retired in November, will be 30 years. My name still comes up in conversation in a positive way, not in a negative way. And, you know, I'm proud that I was able to leave a positive impact, not only on the people I worked with, but on people I encountered, whether they were perpetrators or victims. Even a lot of perpetrators that I encountered over the years, I would see them later on. They'd say, "Hey, you were always a gentleman to me." No, I wasn't to everybody, but to those that deserved to be, I was. And I'm proud of that I was able to keep that reputation and maintain a good relationship with people I worked with and encountered throughout my entire career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And definitely a lot to be said for that, as evidenced by how many people are tuning in tonight in the live chat. The 2 hours flew right by. So it was really a fun conversation. So I appreciate you making the time. And of
No,
course,
I
you being
appreciate
such
you
a good
having me
guest.
on. I thank you very much.
Thank
I'm
you.
honored to be on your show. You have a great show.
Thank you very much. Stick around. We'll talk off the air and say our goodbyes off air. Before I say goodbye to the audience, if you have any shout outs, Stu, the floor is yours.
Just to everybody who's tuning in, I appreciate it. I'm sure there's many that I worked with that are out there. Hi to all of you. And keep watching Mike's show. He has a great show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And of course, the second book that I'll be releasing will be out in the next few days, and that'll be Police Don't Move, the NYPD investigations you should know about, which I look forward to bringing you updates on very soon. And of course, as Stu said, you can go to Amazon, type in Stu Friedman NYPD, and all his books will pop up. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, there's no show next Wednesday. I got a family thing going on. So I'll be with my family next Wednesday. But I'll be back on the air the following Wednesday, August 12th. He worked the NYPD in the 90s and has continued his public service career in EMS. He's working these days as a paramedic, which has a lot of stories in its own right. So look forward to hearing both sides of the coin between his run in the New York City Police Department and, of course, EMS. That'll be Mike Shanat. Will be here for episode 426. That's August 12th, not August 5th, the 12th rather, since we are off the air next week and then back at it to consistent shows going forward. Now, for those of you listening on the audio side, from their 1991 album Road Apples, Canada's The Tragically Hip, are going to bid us farewell with Little Bones. In the meantime, on behalf of Stu Friedman, producer Victor, not here tonight, but here in spirit as always, and all of you in the audience, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your night.
Good night.